Okay, thank you. So hello and welcome. My name is Victoria Keane and I'm one of Homes England's local government capacity centre team members. And I'm delighted to welcome you to the summer learning programme hosted by the local government capacity centre. And this offers a series of knowledge sharing sessions on topics that you've told us are of interest to you. And today's event is an introduction to modern methods of construction. Next slide, please. I'm just going to take you very quickly through the mission of the Homes England's Local Government Capacity Centre. Here it is on the screen. I'll let you have a little look at that. And the summer learning programme is brought to you by the Local Government Capacity Centre. And we've launched the centre following extensive research and consultation with you across local government and with a whole range of other partners to determine where authorities most need support and how it can best be delivered. We look forward to hearing how we did at the end of the session when we share the poll with you, and also with the detailed survey, which we really would like you to respond to. Next slide, please. I'll quickly take you through the agenda. So on the screen, you can see this morning's session. We're going to hear from Jeff Endine from CAST. We're going to hear from Charlotte Taylor-Phillip from DLUHC. And we'll also have Chloe Henshaw, who's going to man the chat. So pop your questions in for them and they will respond. We'll hear from Neil McKay from Places for People, Mike Ormisher from Offsite Homes Alliance, Versha Correa from Homes England, and Paul Gerard from For Housing. And then we'll have Q&A with all of the morning panel and then a lunch break. Okay, next slide, please. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jeff Endine from CAST. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. As Victoria says, my name is Jeff Endine. I'm a director at CAST. CAST is a residential focused consultancy. We work extensively across the development value chain with a particular interest and focus on modernising construction, pre-manufactured solutions that ranges from working with developers, with manufacturers and with government as well, with our Chief Executive Mark Farmer is the government advisor on modernising construction. So if I could have the next slide, please. What I'd like to do in my 20 minutes is really set up the day. I know there's a lot more detailed conversations and presentations that will be delivered later on as we go through the day. But what I'd like to do with my time is really set the scene by focusing on the three issues you can see there at the top. So I'd like to briefly touch on why modernising construction is important and set that into the context of market trends and the rationale for doing things differently. And then to give us all a kind of framework that we can engage in the conversation with, to try and cut through the different buzzwords and phrases and definitions that are out there and provide a sort of common framework for defining and discussing modern methods of construction, and then give you some examples of what that means in practice very briefly. I'll touch on where the sector is in terms of maturity, trends, and growth, though very briefly, and I know others will do that later as we go on, so that by the end of this you should all feel more comfortable with what we mean by modern methods of construction, how it's being used, where it's being used, and what's happening in the market. And picking up on that poll that we saw a minute ago, I think, you know, from our experience working with people across the sector and across the whole construction value chain, what we saw in those results is exactly what we see every day. That actually this is something that people understand is probably important. There's a lot of buzz phrases, catchwords, and sort of not a really solid common understanding. So hopefully what I can do in my presentation today is just kind of debunk and demystify and try and simplify what we're talking about a little bit. So if I can have the next slide, please. I think the starting point for all of this is why would we want to modernise construction? What are the drivers and trends that are out there? And I think what I'd just like to get across from this slide to you is that there are issues affecting construction and development, market conditions that force change. There's also changes that are happening in the wider world around government regulation on building safety and the sustainability agenda that kind of force change in lots of different ways beyond construction. And then beyond that, still what we're seeing from our clients in terms of what they're looking for. So just to quickly unpack all of those as fast as I can. About 6 years ago, our chief executive released a report called Modernise or Die, which was about the labour market in construction, and effectively found that the labour model in construction is not sustainable for the long term. It's heavily dependent on subcontracted labour. There's an ageing workforce. The construction market is not attractive, particularly to young entrants. And this has been backed up even in the last month. There's a report from the Construction Industry Training Board just last month that found that in the next 5 years, the construction industry is 250,000 workers short of the number it needs to be able to deliver at the scale required. So fundamentally, the driver towards modernising construction is that the labour model, traditional construction, site-based, hands-on, multiple trades all working together on site, is an unsustainable model in terms of labour. It's also unsustainable in terms of the housing market itself, because I'm sure we all know that the development and construction model in this country is not developing houses at the pace that's required according to policy. So you're kind of at 225,000 homes a year, as opposed to the 300,000 government target. And also within the construction market, many of you no doubt would have seen recently, a significant inflation, price inflation on materials, unavailability of materials. So I kind of think that all these three trends, they kind of point to a sector that's not productive enough, that utilises a kind of reasonably antiquated labour model, and is subject as a result to kind of external forces in a way that perhaps a more modernised, industrialised, and manufacturing-based approach might be less susceptible to. Then if you step outside of that kind of core model, what we're seeing with government regulation, particularly around building safety, and the need for complete transparency and ownership of quality from end to end of a project, which is just very difficult to achieve with a traditional construction model. The need to drive on energy efficiency, reducing waste, and being able to achieve net zero operational carbon requires a much higher standard of fabric efficiency than can easily be achieved through on-site construction. And then embodied carbon is a kind of step on further of just how difficult it is to achieve good embodied carbon performance using existing methods without rethinking the whole model of how materials are sourced, the choice of materials, how they're put together in an efficient way, and how they are then enabling better outcomes on sustainability. And equally, at the same time, there are commercial drivers in here that we're seeing from the developer sector. So where we're seeing a lot of modern methods of construction happening, it's driven by investors that can understand that the speed of delivery of a modern methods of construction project mean that schemes can be finished much quicker, which means a faster return, and in an environment when costs are rising and quality is now at a premium, looking at doing things differently is really important. So really what I want to get across from all of that is that there are significant drivers for change, and modern methods of construction is one of the responses to that. And I'll just try and set out now exactly what that includes. So the next slide, please. In terms of cutting through those buzzwords and increasing the understanding and kind of being clear what we mean, on the screen you can see lots of different words that you will hear all the time or occasionally, and they all effectively are in the same space. They're all about transforming construction. They're all about doing things differently. And the way that modern methods of construction is intended to work is it's intended to be a generic term, which I'll unpack a bit further as we go on. But it's a generic term which describes doing things differently, and specifically processes that take labour from site, so reduced requirement to have site-based labour, and to take the processes away from site, industrialise them, or use manufacturing more, or whatever is actually the most efficient way. It's kind of less important. And the core concept is less work is done on site because it's more efficient for that to be done further up the delivery chain. And if that's done well, and in a structured way, that will also reduce delivery risk on site and improve quality, because you start to move into factory control conditions where processes can be better overseen. So that's broadly what MMC means, and I'll undo the definition a bit further as we go on. Next slide, please. What we've seen since I mentioned that report from Mark Farmer in 2016, the Modernise or Die report, which basically said the construction sector labour model is not working and can't work for the long term. But broadly, what's happened is that there has been a shift from government, and no doubt you'll have seen this in different ways in your own organisations and your own programmes, to supporting modern methods of construction in different ways. And just to pick up on a couple from the graphic, I think key ones are that the industrial strategies that were produced 2018, 2019, that sort of time, that started to draw connections between modernising construction, employment skills, and actually better productivity, output, and delivery of housing. And that the MMC agenda could kind of bring those different agendas together. That was really important because that just unlocked funding. There's been commitment from government to funding in lots of different ways, and again we'll hear about that later. But I think particularly government funding for MMC in house building through Homes England, which we'll hear about, but also in other development sectors such as education, where there's a significant drive for using modern methods of construction. This really started to stimulate the supply side and growth of investment in manufacturing. And the third one then is really what that starts to do in terms of regional policy. And we're working with a number of regional government bodies that actually are starting to draw the connections between housing delivery in their regions. For instance, in West Midlands, in London, and in Greater Manchester, there are combined efforts to utilise public land, public investment, modern methods of construction to both speed up housing delivery, but also to create industrial benefits in terms of research and development, advanced materials, jobs, skills, and training. And no doubt we'll hear more about that as we go on. But so what we're basically trying to get across is, you know, the drivers are there, but actually the government support is there as well. If I could have the next slide, please. So unpacking that definition a little bit further. So modern methods of construction effectively means any process change or material change or product change that takes work away from site. But to really create more structure around that and to aid understanding, the government agreed a series of definitions of categories of different types of modern methods of construction. And what I'd like to do with these different types is very briefly explain in a bit more detail what each of them is to help you to conceptualize what we're talking about in terms of MMC, because actually the definition is quite broad. It's not necessarily the things you only ever expect to hear. So if I could just have the next slide, please. There are 7 categories of modern methods of construction, and I won't overdo this because I know you're going to have a lot of information to take in, but I just want to get across the message that one, there are 7 types of modern methods of construction, and they range quite significantly. So category 1, and I'm using layman's terms there in those green boxes underneath, are effectively 3D boxes, volumetric boxes that you typically, I think everyone thinks of when they think of modern methods of construction, boxes that are finished in 3D and assembled on site like Lego. And as you move down the number of the categories from there, it starts to become less work happens away from site, more work happens on site. So the next step down from a 3D box is a 2D panel or a frame that's manufactured off site, constructed on site, and then traditional trades work around that and finish the job off. The next step down again is parts of that frame, but not all of that frame. So you can see as you're moving down the value chain, basically less of the work is happening away from site. Then we get into category 4, which is really a placeholder for 3D printing, effectively, in inverted commas, additive manufacturing, new models that will come around in the future using effectively 3D printing to create componentry. Then we get down to the lower end of the spectrum, and it includes lots of things that are happening anyway, and you wouldn't necessarily think of as modern methods of construction, things that could be required by a contractor on a traditional job. So category 5 is things like bathroom pods, kitchen pods, M&E componentry that's pre-manufactured and brought to site, and then the rest of the build, including the structure, is built around that. And then we get to 6 and 7, which I think are really interesting, because this really is the space where it's more about thinking differently and process change than it is about factories. So category 6 is what I would call smarter materials. So for instance, a brick slip covering a large part of the building rather than bricks individually having to be built up each time. Doesn't have to be brick slips, but that whole concept that materials can be designed better to enable on-site installation to be faster and less skilled. So we have less on-site labour and more work happening away from site. And 7 is how can we improve processes? What can we do differently? Things like BIM and wearable technology. So just to kind of land that as a definition framework, there are 7 types, and they range quite significantly from fully volumetric, very high amounts of off-site manufacturing through to using smarter processes on the site. In the middle there, you can see there's a sort of differentiating point. Categories 1 to 4A are about the structure of building. So that's where most of the MMC happens. Categories 4B down to 7 are about bits of buildings and process change, but they all count as modern methods of construction. If I could have the next slide, please. Another phrase that we should try to define early is PMV, or pre-manufactured value. which is a way of measuring that concept of how much work is done away from site. So the way to calculate PMV is that you work out the value of a build, and then you work out how much of that value of the build is done away from site, and the PMV that you get as a result of that is a measure of how much of your building is MMC. So if I can go on to the next slide, PMV is important because some of you may have heard this talked about in terms of funding and as a metric for the extent of PMV. From our point of view, we think it's really just a proxy for doing things better. And it's not something that you necessarily want to be driving to a high number on. If I can have the next slide, it's something that you want to be thinking about what's the optimal number for PMV. So in the funding arrangements, there's a 55% kind of aspiration for PMV. Those larger volumetric offsite schemes that I talked about, they would achieve 60, 70%, and that's not always the right answer for a scheme. So one thing to be thinking about in terms of conceptualizing MMC and the sorts of MMC that should be delivered on jobs is around thinking about optimizing pre-manufactured value. So for my site, given the logistics constraints, the contractor model that I use, the labor force that I have available to me, what's the way to push from where we are now to a better PMV, but not necessarily saying that going right to the end of the spectrum is the right way to go. I'm conscious that I need to keep to time, so I might just fly through the next couple of slides reasonably quickly. If I can have the next one, please. I think you'll hear about this later, so I won't touch on it too long, but just to say that concept of PMV is now landing in funding agreements, and you'll hear more about that as we go on through the rest of the presentations. Next slide, please. So just really very quickly to give you imagery and examples to go behind that definition framework of what is MMC. This is your category 1 far end of the scheme of that definition framework, 3D boxes that are assembled in a factory, created in a factory and assembled on site. And the example you can see in the top right corner there is the world's largest volumetric tower in Croydon. 40-story tower delivered in 18 months, really exemplifying the benefit of a tight inner city scheme. Complex building makes a lot of sense, more sense here than in lots of other situations, to take as much of that work away from site as possible, and then to finish the job off on site by assembling those modules. So that's category 1. Next slide, please. Category 2 is the framing types of solutions. The example we're showing there is a scheme in East London. The other example that you may have heard of is the Goldsmith Street development for Norwich Council, which I think is really interesting. It won the Sterling Prize as a passive house development. No one ever talks about it as MMC because actually those frames, not the whole volumes, the frames were built and they're kind of hidden within a normal looking building developed by a normal contractor. So just to kind of flag, this happens in quite a lot of ways that you wouldn't ordinarily see. I think I've probably covered enough of the definitions. There's other things I want to cover, and I am running out of time, I've just been reminded. So if I can flick through a couple of slides, the next one, please. So just back to the previous one. So just I want to touch on market trends and what you might be hearing about out there in the market. So the first trend is that this is starting to take off now. So to be aware, if you're not only are there specialist modular and other types of MMC manufacturers starting to emerge in scale, but we're seeing it being picked up by the house builders and major developers in this country, which I think is a sign of maturation in the sector. It's a sign that it's becoming a bit less out there. And if the likes of Berkeley and Barratt's and Countryside are investing in their own manufacturing capabilities, then that logic around it's smarter, less workforce dependent and more productive to do elements of buildings in factory situations is starting to land. And you can see that commercially that's being picked up by big organizations in this country. Next slide. There have been setbacks. So even in the last month, 2 examples here, we shouldn't hide from these, of specialist manufacturers or manufacturer developers that have gone into administration. Now, what I think this shows us is actually a sector that is maturing. The challenge with both of these organizations partly is around business maturity, alignment of their manufacturing solutions to the market, and really being able to keep enough flow through their factories to be able to sustain the manufacturing process. Now, this is something that manufacturers are learning, developing, evolving as we speak. It's something that will continue to evolve. It's the fact that we have failures in this space is instructive. It's something to watch out for. But I think what we are seeing is actually a maturation, and certain sorts of business models will become more productive, more useful, kind of more evolved to market conditions than others. Okay, so I've got to hand over it very shortly. So next slide. Last thing to pick up on from me is if you're looking for a resource that unpacks this a bit further, and if you want to kind of take some time to look at what the supply chain looks like, who's available out there, who's doing what. This is a new free to use open source resource that we've created at CAST in partnership with a company called Cope. So if I can have the next slide, please. I'll put the links into the chat in a second. Effectively, everything I've just told you about the 7 types of MMC, you can search according to those types, find out who's out there, who's making what, who's built what case studies, you know, real completed examples. And if I can have the next slide. You can also search by geography. So you can start to look now for manufacturers that are in your locality, people that can support your own build programs and development needs. So I'll put the link into the chat. The point I'm trying to make with all of this is that as the sector evolves and as the market evolves, more sorts of information of this type linked to building everyone's understanding of what is meant by modern methods of construction and sort of debunking, demystifying, this is going to be really valuable to helping the whole sector to mature and to enable people to use it more. So just finally on my conclusions. So to conclude, so the industry trends are driving this change. So there are real industry reasons why more effective and productive construction methods are required. And that includes a whole range of solutions, not just the volumetric types of MMC. There's 7 different types. There's a whole different range of ways that manufacturing and process improvement and digital and smart thinking can actually help to optimize and drive performance in construction. There's an industry here that is growing and maturing quickly from a low base, and there are setbacks, and we will continue to have setbacks, but we'll also continue to see investment and growth. The fact that major organizations are investing in this space is a really good sign that this is a trend that's going to continue. And actually look out, and we'll hear more from the likes of Osher, who's going to be on the call later. There are collaborations growing now on the demand side, on the client side of local authorities, housing associations, starting to work together because actually it makes sense to partner and to share and collaborate in developing through MMC rather than doing it on your own and unable and learn and fail individually. So I think I've got through everything broadly in my time frame. And at that point, I need to hand over to Charlotte, please.
Hi, sorry, just coming off mute. Hi, everyone. I'm Charlotte Taylor-Phillip. I'm team lead at DLUHC for MMC. I oversee a kind of overarching MMC strategy. My colleague Chloe is also on the call to kind of help out with questions. So next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to be talking to you about DLUHC's MMC strategy and our kind of policy objectives that sit behind it, and also set that in the context of wider government work on MMC in construction. Next slide, please. So this government has a manifesto commitment to support MMC in housing for all of the reasons that Jeff has set out so well to you this morning. I must say it feels quite odd to be talking about this given today's news, but I would say that I am, I think, 4 housing ministers in this role, and all of them have been very supportive of MMC, regardless of kind of what their overarching priorities have been. That's been a common thread across all of them, and I think we would expect that to continue whatever happens. So DLUHC, together with Homes England, have a joint strategy. And the purpose of that is to try and bring down the cost of MMC in housing. We know that particularly in some categories, it is more expensive than traditional construction. It can struggle to compete if it's not at scale. We're aiming to stimulate a sustained demand pipeline, which we know is so important for manufacturing and is kind of crucial to getting that scale that they need. We're looking at providing employment opportunities throughout the country. So one of the things we're in with MMC is that it moves some of the jobs that may traditionally be in kind of London and the southeast and spreads it a bit more evenly across the country. And we're looking at how we build a stronger evidence base on the benefits and use of MMC, and that by category, because at the moment the data is sparing. So all of that sits within a broader context of work to reform the construction industry by this government, with a greater focus on productivity and innovation. So you may have come across the construction playbook, which outlines the government's expectations for how contracting authorities and suppliers, including the supply chain, should engage with each other. And that focuses really heavily on a banner of harmonise, digitise and rationalise. And it encourages departments to collaborate in order to develop and adopt shared requirements and common standards for MMC projects. And that includes looking at standardised and interoperable components, which I'll talk about a bit more in a minute. And through that, we've seen, as Jeff mentioned, kind of various projects across different government departments. Outside of housing, several departments have a presumption in favour for MMC that is in law. So they have to use MMC to build hospitals, schools, prisons, service accommodation, unless there's a very good reason not to. We don't have that in housing, largely because we don't directly deliver any housing and the market is much more fragmented, but that doesn't mean our support for MMC is anything less. Next slide, please. So what does that look like in practice? We talk about the 5 S's as a team for our MMC strategy. That's just so it's easier to remember. So those are scaling up, making greater use of MMC through our programs to provide that scale that the industry needs. It's stimulating the market, so funding source, kind of mentioned in the chat that the higher upfront costs. It's something we're very alive to. Safety, so making sure that the MMC that we're backing is safe and that the regulatory framework is keeping pace. Standardization, which I've mentioned, and then supplementary levers, just so it's another S, but that includes things like MMC is championed through the National Model Design Code. And there are a few others I'll talk about there. So taking each of those in turn, scale, we know at the moment that the cost of building a volumetric, so a modular or a panelised MMC home can be more expensive than traditional build. That's because of the high setup costs and high fixed overheads compared with traditional construction. But manufacturers are unable to reach scale at which they become price efficient at the moment. So what we did to kind of tackle this, or partly tackle this, is through our affordable housing programme, at least 25% units delivered through strategic partnerships, and then 10% of the rest of the programme will use MMC. So that's potentially 19,000 MMC homes over 5 years. That target has been exceeded in the bids, and we're looking at 40% of delivery through our first allocations. So probably coming out more at 35,000 homes over 5 years. We will continue to look at how our different programs can drive scale in the MMC sector, and that includes in custom and self-build, which might not be something you've thought about in this space, but half of all homes in the self and custom build sector are built using MMC. A lot of that is the kind of category 2 panelised, but it's spread across the categories. So in terms of stimulating the market, as someone touched upon in the chat, the payment structure for MMC is really different from traditional house building, where developers are usually funded on a kind of monthly basis. MMC carries higher risk upfront and has a different risk exposure. And there's limited or no finance available from the private sector to cover that gap because of the immaturity of the market and a limited track record. So what we've done as government is provide funding for manufacturers directly and through the Levelling Up Home Building Fund. So that's development finance that's available at the moment for MMC developers to kind of address that capital gap. The fund launched in 2022, February 2022, and applications are open for finance from £250,000. So I would encourage you to have a look at that if that's an issue that developers in your area are struggling with. Standardization is something that was raised with us through stakeholder engagement. So at the moment, the bespoke nature of MMC creates supply chain risk. So where Jeff was saying some manufacturers have gone out of business, what happens to projects that are currently underway if every system is completely bespoke? We think that deters lenders and investors and reduces the capacity for economies of scale at the moment. So over the past year, we've worked with industry experts to explore options for this, and we've developed a proposal for an open source kit of parts, which would mean there would be interoperable and standardized components across different MMC systems to take out some of that additional cost and additional risk. We've gone out to tender for that piece of work, and we expect it to complete in autumn 2023. Safety is a really important one for us, obviously. We want to see innovation in the housing market, but we want that to happen in a way that is safe. So we have a couple of interventions in this area. One of them is looking at the fragmented approach that we have to assessing MMC and the fragility of the insurance and lending market in the space. At the moment, there's a lot of duplication of inspections and requests, and there's not a kind of standardized approach from insurers, valuers, and lenders. We've looked over the years at various ways of kind of addressing this, and where we are at the moment is we've signed contracts with the BSI to take forward a publicly available specification, a kind of new technical standard that would set out what good looks like for MMC across different categories and across different materials. That's going to take 2 years to develop, but we hope that it will kind of bring greater clarity for the sector and then kind of give assurance to insurers and lenders that isn't necessarily there at the moment or can be a problem. We're also looking, we've also commissioned external research into the potential for systemic risk within MMC. So because you're doing something in a factory, that often means you've got better quality assurance, you're not doing it at height and in poor weather, but it also means if something goes wrong, that mistake can be repeated across multiple projects. So we have research looking at that, which we will publish I'm going to say in due course, because we don't know what the next 24 hours is going to look like, let alone much beyond that. And then supplementary levers. So we have £10 million of funding that we're hoping to work with local government to boost their MMC ambitions. Again, we're not quite sure what that looks like at the moment, but watch the space for announcements. MMC is included in the National Model Design Code, and we're looking at kind of how we use all of the levers available to us as a department to boost MMC. Okay, yes, so I think as we've discussed, both Jeff and I, MMC is a nascent sector, but it's one that government is really focused on removing barriers to and seeing grow, and we have kind of various interventions to make that happen. But the benefits of MMC are only going to be reached at scale. And so if you're thinking about it in your local area, that might mean thinking about demand aggregation across projects or across local authority boundaries, and greater standardization of what you're asking for.
Yeah, hello everybody, and thank you for allowing me to take part in today's session. It's really nice to be joining you all. My name is Neil Mackay, and I'm a business development manager and the commercial lead for Places for People Living Plus. We are Places for People Group's specialist supported living provider. We offer homeless people, including refugees, families, and people with complex needs, a safe place to live, and the support that we give helps to hopefully improve the confidence and peace of mind vulnerable people need to live independently and play a more positive role in their community. We also build new homes, we buy and convert existing homes, we work with commissioning agencies, specialist care partners, and external investors to create tailored service and develop initiatives to help put people back on their feet. And so in my segment, we're going to discuss the new and innovative approach that my organisation is taking towards solving homelessness. And as part of that discussion, I'll present what we've identified to be the key opportunities and challenges facing us and other providers. Hopefully by the end of my segment, you'll have a clear understanding from a provider's perspective of the key conditions to be met in order for a provider to successfully develop modular housing. And I'm going to do this by way of reference to a recently completed modular development which I led on. Before I go into some of the detail, I think it's important to recognise from the outset and highlight that this was a very specific modular application from a supported development. And so some of this will have wider application for general needs housing. Some elements may not be as relevant. Thank you. Next slide, please. Lovely. Okay, so our case study. It relates to, as I said, a successful modular development of 6 homes in Wisbech in Fenland. But what I'd like to do is quickly do some scene setting of how this opportunity came around. So if we cast our minds back to March 2020 and the early stages of the COVID-19 pandemic, the government launched its Everybody In campaign, which required local authorities, as you know, to take urgent action to house rough sleepers and those at risk of rough sleeping, in order to protect people's health, really, and produce wider transmission of COVID-19. That campaign required self-contained rooms or rooms with minimal sharing of facilities, which was to, protect people's health and reduce wider transmission. In the 3 months that followed, and jumping forward to June, the government released statistics to suggest that the initiative had housed 15,000 people who were sleeping rough. And in terms of its future, that campaign was to be taken forward and tied in with the MHCLG's, well, the Department for Levelling Up's initiative called the Next Steps Accommodation Programme. And that programme was going to make available financial resources needed to support local authorities and partners to prevent people from returning to the streets. So given the immediacy of the response required and the timescales set as part of that campaign, hotels, B&Bs were the primary focus. And Will's Places for People did pick up the conversation quickly and engage with numerous local authorities. For us, the lack of readily available accommodation and alongside the timescales associated with this tranche of the fund meant that we weren't able to make an application. However, when the programme resurfaced in April of 2021, it did so as the Rough Sleepers Accommodation Programme, and it had a significant remaining capital and revenue fund, and for us, a more achievable timeline with the same focus on additionality. And so it's at this point that internally we talk about the stars aligning. Because we previously engaged with Sunderland District Council, and upon reopening the lines of communication, we identified an opportunity to propose an MMC solution in the area to create 6 modular homes on an existing site that we owned. Sunderland were able to recommend a project partner in Alia Impact, and they in turn recommended a modular unit builder in New Meaning Foundation. They were a local organisation with a fantastic mission to employ former homeless individuals in the build of their units. So it all just felt right from the off. Places for People had an existing relationship with the Ferry Project, who are a Wiz Beach-based charity dealing with homelessness. And so with those key partners in place and with access to funding and the support of Homes England and the Department for Levelling Up, we felt we had a viable project and that modern methods of construction represented our most realistic model for meeting the demand within the 8 to 9 month time frame that was available to us. And so the stars were aligned, a collection of collaborating partners, all pulling in the same direction towards a collective goal. Next slide, please. Okay, so our project. Well, if we start with our proposal, it was a fairly simple one. It was to supply 6 modular homes on a disused car park in Wisbech for rough sleepers to meet identified needs in a significant rough sleeping population that already existed in Sunderland. Support to those individuals was to be placed by the Ferry Project. They would support move-on homes for rough sleepers and those at risk of rough sleeping, and provide a secure and safe environment for up to 2 years prior to move on into general needs accommodation if appropriate. In terms of some local context, Sunderland District Council stated that with a dedicated local partnership and the advice and support of the MHCLG, they had been able to place 50 clients into move-on accommodation through earlier stages of the programme, but had around 20 plus clients that remained that they needed to find a solution for. And so Sunderland's ultimate aim was to have around 70 properties in the district ring-fenced for rough sleepers and those at risk of rough sleeping in order to make their plans successful. And the 6 units that we were going to provide would form a key part of that portfolio. Just a little bit in respect of our costings. The units were produced at a cost of, well, they were produced at cost for a total of 55k per unit. Of course, on top of that, we had project costs and site costs, meaning a development total of around £450,000. So in total, around about £75,000 per unit once everything was factored in. And I think it's important to note, though, that in our more recent explorations, that figure has increased due to the challenges that we're probably all facing at the moment with the current economic situation. In terms of our timeline, it was a challenging one. Our application went in late June in 2021. We heard back in early August, and delivery was required by the 31st of March 2022. Essentially meaning the project was required to realise within 30 weeks of the application outcome, and actually 12 weeks from the eventual planning decision outcome that we received. So as you can imagine, a very significant challenge. Next slide, please. So what do we believe are the key considerations? Well, first and foremost, land. Land is crucial. In order to meet our financial hurdle rates internally, our land for us must be owned or come with a significant cost, and I would expect that that would be the same for many other providers. Alternatively, a long lease of, for example, 500 years, so effectively nil value, would also be appropriate. Any proposed plot of land must be free from restrictions and covenants that may otherwise limit its use. The strength of the land must be hard standing, so that can be confirmed through land density strength testing. That will determine if the land is suitable, but it will also give you an indication of the level of groundwork that might be required in order to reinforce and prepare it. It does also determine the appropriate solution for the foundation of the units, so whether that be screw piles or plinths. And finally, the land should be environmentally sound, and by that we mean there should be no exposure to chemicals, nor should there be any risk to protected wildlife or trees. So it's important to recognise that the characteristics of the land are a key challenge. It is potentially your most expensive item of any development after the purchase of the units themselves, and it therefore represents one of the largest risks to successfully delivering a project. So location is also an important consideration, and access is key. The plot will potentially need to be accessed by a crane, or at the very least a spider crane, in order to place the units on their foundations. It will also need appropriate access for lorries, medium-sized contractor vehicles, in order to deliver to the side of the site, depending on the site's configuration. Proximity and therefore access to mains electric, to water, to drainage, all have to be considered. There is currently an alternative off-grid solution being developed, but so far in our conversations with the providers, that hasn't been recommended. The site should be close to other services, ideally within any provider's heartlands, for ease of their management, particularly where they're looking at managing that development themselves. And the site should be well connected to public services, to amenities and to transport links. Privacy needs also to be considered, so the home shouldn't be too closely overlooked, and ideally would sit within a fenced or otherwise bounded area for added security and just to give a sense of community. So partnerships. As I've touched on, when we talked about stars aligning, one of the key factors in the success of our Sunderland Modular project was its collaborative approach from all partners. And by that, we had a number of invested partners working quickly and effectively towards a shared ambition right from the outset, from the initial application, key decision making at the front end, right through to the award of funding, and then planning, and then the subsequent delivery of the project. So some of the key partners I would outline that would be required would be a management or project consultant with extensive knowledge and expertise of modular housing to support and oversee the delivery of the project that may be necessary. Were you aren't managing the development yourself, or managing the project yourselves afterwards, then a co-provider, preferably with some expertise of operating for modular units. I think it's important that you are well engaged with local authority and commissioning groups, and those local authorities and commissioning groups hopefully would have not only an understanding of, but an acceptance of and an appetite for an MMC product. And as well as that, a commitment to sort of the revenue and support funding in the longer term of the units that we plan to place. Housing benefit, also a key partner. Front-end engagement is required really to ensure that any proposed rents and service charges that are used in creating your modelling are in line with what we can achieve from the region's housing benefit. Planning department support is essential. Can't understate that really, both in respect of them understanding a modular approach and trying to help us remove barriers, but also in respect of providing a swift and clear decision, which is an area where we have experienced some difficulties recently. Building control and building regs are another key partner. Again, early engagement and frequent communication is a must to ensure there are no unforeseen challenges later in the project or on completion of the development when building regulation might come to sign off. And finally, not as essential, but a technical project management lead might be recommended. Depending on the specifics of the project, you might want an experienced project lead on the ground with a background of modular delivery. In terms of the units, so at the moment, Places for People are expanding our knowledge base in this area through our exploration of new projects with new providers. We're seeing a lot of different specs and there's a lot out there. but there are some key conditions that I see as being needed to be met in order to a project to be taken forward. So size and dimensions must be considered. It's important to work with architects to understand your size requirements and your limitations. For us, Fenland, just to give you some context, to place 6 units, we required 336 meters squared. I would recommend full turnkey solutions for ease of management. I think trying to manage multiple contractors on various different elements of the development can prove challenging. It's important to have an awareness of nationally described space standards and how modular units will fit into that standard. And I think preference, is for all units to be built to Future Home Standards 2025, which has a requirement to increase the energy efficiency for new homes and for new homes to be built future-proofed with low carbon heating. And of course, another key requirement is for a strong focus on the quality of manufacture, ensuring the appropriate warranties and accreditation are in place in relation to any units, superstructures, fittings, roofings, panellings, and for that, a standard called BOPAS is recommended, which does give some guarantees to funders and lenders associated with the homes that the non-traditional methods that have been taken will stand the test of time for at least 60 years. Very conscious of time, so I'll move along swiftly. Finally, financials. It's important for us to support a development, for us to be able to support a development with a temporary social housing rent classification. We need to own the land, or we need for the land to come without a cost, as I've mentioned. We need to ensure that the site costs associated with preparing the land are controlled and minimised. Naturally, it's important to have an agreed and fixed price with a modular provider. It's important as well to recognise the impact of any delays to the delivery of the project, not only in terms of additional costs, but also the impact that has on revenue generation. So project management, as I've said, is essential. And it's important, as I've referenced earlier, to have an agreed position on the revenue funding from the local authority in respect of the longer term to support the development. Next slide, please. And so, in summary, we believe that the key factors that are going to determine the ability to deliver a modular construction from the perspective of a provider are, as it says, the costs associated with the land, ability to control those, suitability of location, and factors relating to access, both for the development and for the customer group. Planning, as stated, it will make, break, or potentially significantly hamper any development and its timeline. And I think some of that is about getting the application right first time, and for that reason, it may be worth considering a pre-planning exercise. And finally, as I've said, a commitment to revenue funding beyond the initial funding associated with the programme. So for Places for People, and using the example of the RSAT programme, we had revenue support for 2 years beyond the project's completion. And so for Fenland, the assurance was given by the district council that intensive housing management model which they operate there would support the project's longer term. And on that note, I'd like to thank everybody for inviting me to speak today and share our experiences. And I'd like to hand over to Mike Ormisher from Offsite Homes Alliance. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Neil. Really enjoyed that presentation. Apologise for my background, and I'm actually on holiday at the moment, so I'm joining you from the beautiful South Coast. Next slide, please. So my name is Mike Ormisher. I'm the project director for the Offsite Homes Alliance, which was set up in October 2020 by a number of registered providers who were looking to start their MMC journey, most of whom were strategic partners of Homes England. And after a long debate and a long discussion around the strategy and what they wanted, they appointed me as project director. And my background is manufacturing. I've been in manufacturing for over 40 years around the world, manufacturing systems and houses and larger projects in offsite construction. So they employed me to help them along their journey. And that was looking at category 1 and category 2 MMC type systems, so volumetric and panelized systems, how we manage the whole process going forward, how we'd set up a framework, or do we actually use an existing framework in the market? Are they ready for the types of communication that we have to have with the manufacturing industry? And that was a really important step. We need to look at, excuse me, a design pattern book and zero carbon playbook, and then how the whole vertical integration happened for all of the RPs to work with and manage. So that was the reason we set up the whole the Offsite Homes Alliance. Next slide, please. We are now, after a number of weeks discussing this right at the very start, we set up 23 registered providers, joined the Alliance. Originally, back in 2012, I believe, it was called the Modular Alliance. Lots of discussion was happening right back then. It then moved into Homes for the North. And as many of you will understand, there's a lot of discussion going on within those alliances. But as it became very obvious to the partners, they really needed to understand the journey for offsite construction. So we went our separate ways and set up the Offsite Homes Alliance for that particular reason. Now, the combined aggregated demand for the 23 RPs is 10,000 homes a year. Not all of those houses are procured in MMC. That's obvious. But the idea was, if we get this right, and it's the right thing to do, then we really should start to think about how we procure and work with MMC. If it's working for us and it's providing the quality and the performance we need, then that's the strategy we should follow. So it was very difficult for the RPs at the time because there were a lot of small RPs in there, but we did have some big nationals like Guinness and Great Places and Together. And the idea was that if we shared knowledge, shared experience, we looked at what we were currently doing, because a lot of the RPs were using panelized systems. Some of them were using volumetric systems, working with the likes of Ilka and Top Hat, LNG, IDMH and others. But they were all having similar problems, not really understanding how to manage the process. And I think the theme of this presentation that I'll show you now is about the process, because none of this is really modern method of construction: timber, steel, concrete, insulation. We've been manufacturing with those materials for hundreds and thousands of years. It's more about taking the process from a site and putting it into a factory and allowing the manufacturer to take control and improving the quality and getting better insight into the delivery of the systems through better certification, better warranty control. So I think the message really is that the more you do in a factory, the more control you have. You're manufacturing up to a volumetric system or a panelized system. You've got the insurers in there working with you. You've got the warranty providers. You've got the certification bodies. So you see a lot more in a factory than you potentially would do on a site for 2,500 widgets trying to create a house on site with hundreds of BBA certificates and things like that. So that was the whole concept of that. Next slide, please. On the left-hand side, you can see the organizations that we have in the Alliance, some big organizations there. We've had those consistently for almost 2 years now, and they've all self-funded the investment, the research, the development, the building business cases we've put together, the industry research we've put together, working with combined authorities and city regions and local authorities. We've worked together very hard. Also with Homes England on the right-hand side, we've worked hard, and they've supported us right from the beginning. Also, for instance, in Manchester, where a lot of the RPs are based, Greater Manchester Combined Authority have supported us very, very well and are continuing to do that through levelling up initiatives. We have CAST, the team of CAST, is Mark Farmer, who's the government champion. I think some of his team are on the call at the moment, supporting us through a project management office. And we have a whole range of other organizations like Pollard Thomas, the architects, Harlow, who are research and development, University of Salford, who are doing our building physics and social science reviews. We have engineers, we have MEP engineers, we have legal organizations like Trowers and Hamlins, who are helping us put together a framework. And NHBC, for instance, are working with us to look at the pattern book so that we can ensure that when we actually work with the pattern book, they are happy and confident that all of the stuff that's happening on site is mentioned in the pattern book, and that pattern book is actually being developed and delivered to do exactly what it says on the tin. Clearly, we're working with Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, who we've been talking to for quite some time, just to keep the conversation going, to make sure that we're not missing anything and we're capturing all of the different areas of discussion. And myself down at the bottom as Oscarsbrook Consulting, working with the RPs and other organizations as project director. And as I said, my background is offsite construction, so I apologize, I'm not going to show you lots of pictures of different systems, but this is about modern methods of process rather than modern methods of construction. Next slide, please. So right at the very start, we surveyed all of the RPs just to get a feel for what they were expecting, the deliverables, the ambitions of each RP, bearing in mind that a lot of these organisations have spent hundreds of thousands of pounds trying to develop their own MMC strategies, working with consultants and trying to understand how they could take advantage of the market. But as I said before, a lot of these organisations are small and maybe only had 50, 60, 70 houses to build a year, whereas some of them were up in the 1500s a year. So the whole concept, as Charlotte said before, is about aggregated demand, bringing all of the organisations together to look at how we could aggregate the demand, looking at standardization, but more importantly, the process of delivery, which in the RPs, they had very few people in the organisations looking at how they could deliver and work with manufacturers. They had growing concerns over quality, the demand for MMC, obviously through initiatives like Homes England with the 25% delivery mechanism. Demand for high performance and regulations was a key concern, as it is also for the traditional house builders, with the Future Homes Hub now being set up to look at that. Lack of MMC knowledge internally, I've mentioned, lots of reports flying around with lots of high costs involved at the time. But they also had a huge lack of trust in the new technologies that were coming forward and the new investors that were springing up. And that's not to say that the technologies were bad or poorly performing, or that the investors weren't good investors. That's not the case at all. It was just that they didn't really understand how these technologies were moving forward, whether to trust them or not, what type of certification they had, whether they had warranty provision, how long the investors were going to stay involved. You know, the factories were being set up, certifications were being carried out, new products were being developed. But as we know, investors don't stay around forever, and that was a concern of the RPs. And therefore, they had a lack of trust, I would say, in the delivery process and the longevity of it, and whether they were going to see issues around legacy. They had no real visibility of the private sector, which came out very clear in the research, or how to really collaborate. Now, there were some good projects, I have to say, and Neil's just shown an example of that. But in the main, there was a lot of concern around how to work with manufacturers, and equally so on the other side, because the whole idea and the concept of OSHA is to also support manufacturing businesses, to bring them together with the public sector as well. So extremely fragmented sector was the overall consensus, with no formal direction or control, and that was on both sides of the table. Next slide, please. We set off with delivering a number of business cases, and I'm going to quickly flick through these slides because there's quite a lot of information in here that you can read afterwards. But the main ambitions were to have a very efficient and long-term MMC supply chain partnership with consistent aggregated demand and optimum value for all stakeholders involved, and that's on both sides of the table. And at the beginning of the venture, they were also talking about a potential JV with some of the partners that we bring onto the framework around, can we set up a hub, a manufacturing hub? Is there an opportunity to set up a manufacturing business outside of the RP framework? These were all things that they were discussing, and that's still open to discussion, with a number of discussions taking place at the moment. Next slide, please. This was the journey, very basic journey, because there's lots of information behind each of these boxes, but it was originally in the discovery phase to agree the strategy, the program, to discover the individual needs of the RPs, to confirm the business model throughout the whole process, looking to onboard the supply chain, complete standard pattern books and zero carbon strategies, looking at the supply chain and what they do. And I have to say, looking how stable and what sort of capacity they had. One of the things we're finding, and I'll show it in a moment, is a lot of the manufacturers that were doing a really good job were starting to fill up very quickly. So if you're committing to a framework and bringing lots of manufacturers on there that are doing a really good job, it is possible that those manufacturers would get full up very quickly, even though at the moment, a lot of them are struggling for volume. So we're looking at things like that, and how manufacturers could cope with a significant increase in volume for example, in this case, 10,000 homes a year. Moving forward into development, securing sites, looking at trailblazers, refining the strategy, updating the business plans, and then moving forward to establish the whole process into an OSHA delivery platform that we could grow, potentially with more RPs, potentially with more local authorities, combined authorities, and city regions, as we're talking to now. Next slide, please. We have a very strict governance process in place, as you can imagine. You won't be able to see these images very clearly, but this is all in the business case, which we can share. We have a strategic direction group, which consists of the CEOs of the strategic partners of Homes England, the top 6 RPs. We have deployment management group who look at the overall progress and messages and delivery of all of the working groups. We have supply chain and integration and monitoring groups looking at how we're working with the supply chain, development of the framework, looking at how we monitor homes on site. We have design specification and demand, and also public affairs and stakeholder groups as well involved in the whole process. Next slide, please. One of the things that came out of the research, the original business case, was all of the things that were happening. And these are the types of things that we've been talking specifically to Homes England and DLUHC about. We identified 18 key areas that we thought were really important to us as organisations trying to deliver MMC for the assets we build, but things that we can't control in its entirety. So building safety, interface quality management, system component quality training. Securitization was a big issue, which we think we've overcome now, talking to the six big banks and the likes of Savills and JLL. We've come to a really good agreement that we share information with them to give more confidence and comfort in the delivery of MMC houses. Cost and affordability, procurement frameworks, all of these things we identified as key areas to understand and to report back on, which we have been doing over the last 18 months, which is why it's taken quite some time to get to the position we are at the moment. One of the outputs of that was an offsite performance centre report, which is looking at setting up a centre of excellence in the Northwest to deal with all of the things that we can't deal with on site. So research, development, building performance, regulations, PAS standards, that sort of thing. And we're looking to set that up very quickly with support from a number of organisations. Next slide, please. This is just an example of some of the organisations that came back and said, absolutely, you build it, we will come. We will work with you. This is a wider issue, and we will certainly work with OSHA to develop answers and solutions to a lot of the areas that RPs and local authorities are looking at. And why wouldn't we? If we can work with you and get access to an aggregated demand and lots of work like this, then we should be working together as a collaboration. So this information is all inside a business case. Next slide, please. Very quickly, the design pattern book we've developed. We have a number of houses now that we've identified as key, important to the RPs across a range of different RPs, looking at the DFMA journey from start to finish, from a factory to a site, to master planning, the configuration of the houses, how they go together, the types and the layouts. If you can just slip through the next two slides, please. So the slide before is just the master planning and how we lay the houses out and how we design them right through to future home standard, which is where we started. But we also have a strategy for passive house and net zero carbon as well, and embodied carbon, looking at how we get from where we are today right through to zero carbon. And a lot of the RPs are saying, what's the point in going to future homes? Let's go straight to zero carbon. Let's get the fabric first sorted out, and then we can plug and play with the systems moving forward. So we've done a lot of work in this area. Next slide, please. And here you can see just an example of what's in that design and zero carbon playbook. There's a lot of information in there, including things like environmental design, costings, estimated bills, carbon payback periods, and that sort of thing. So we've done a lot of work on this. Particularly, it's taken a long time, almost 12 months to develop this playbook, which has now got an NHBC accepts stamp on it, as it is at the moment, to REBA Stage 3, and they'll be working with us to make sure that we deliver this in its full glory. Next slide, please. One of the things that we have done is looked at the risk analysis. We have dashboards where we've done some soft market testing, looking at organisations that potentially could bid for the work on the framework, which is due to come out in 2 weeks' time. We have a full DFMA process and DFA mapping process. And the dashboard really is just to keep an eye on where the RPs are, where the manufacturers are, looking at capacity, looking at a certification, for example, and then we can work backwards and forwards between manufacturers and the RPs as a project management office to make sure that everything's working fine. Just conscious of time. Next slide, please. Here's an example very quickly of how we're looking at vertical integration. So where the project starts, what we would need to do, looking at the sites from pre-delivery right through to REBA Stage 3 and onwards, because this is really important, trying to understand whether the site is ready, what type of system is right for the site, etc., etc. So we'll be looking at all of this and making sure we provide support and guidance on this as part of the framework. Next slide, please. This is just another example of how we're looking at that, looking at the delivery mechanisms from design and build right through to integrated partnership, where at the bottom of the slide, you'll see DMB, we have thousands of organizations that can do that. But as you move through into fully integrated partnerships, as Neil mentioned, a full turnkey operation, less than 10 in the market that can deliver that. So looking at how this can work with the RPs and the types of choices they have. Next slide, please. And then key important to that is what the cost of the houses are. In the standard pattern book, we have this down to the really sort of pennies now, right throughout the country, from the northeast down to the south coast. The different types of houses that we designed and developed with MEP, structural engineers and architects, and how they would could be built on site with the different types of systems. So this database is quite big now. Next slide, please. And I think just the last couple of slides here, we were really concerned at the very start of this that we didn't want to be seen just as a framework, because we're not just a framework. The framework is the delivery mechanism. But looking at the market, we identify that some organizations provide frameworks only. Some have framework with an aggregated demand, with lots of organizations supporting it. Some organizations have a framework plus a project management office without the aggregated demand. And the OSHA proposition on the right-hand side, which is project management office, aggregated demand, pattern books, zero carbon strategies, and the full DFMA engineering and mapping process. So it was really important that we gave insight and control to the RPs right from the start. Next slide, please. And yes, finally, this is just sort of an illustration of the types of services that the project management office will be providing through the framework when it's launched in a couple of weeks. Making sure that the RPs have sort of a hand-holding process, if you like, working with the manufacturers to make sure that we are communicating backwards and forwards and supporting on both sides of the table, from looking at the piece of land that's available right through to the delivery and the certification and warranty process, including training and support for the maintenance teams inside the RPs as well. And additionally, we can provide more services on the right-hand side, which would be at an additional cost, looking at full contract management, etc. Next slide, please. I think that's it. My final slide. So the ecosystem, what it looks like, RPs in the middle, project management office at the top, framework on the right-hand side, which gives us the aggregated demand, supply chain, working with supply chain to make sure everybody's happy. On the top left-hand side, a place to innovate through the Offsite Performance Centre to make sure we're taking all of the technical and policy and critical issues off the path, working with them separately with industry and sending out commission packages. And then potentially there's an opportunity for a manufacturing facility, which is under control, under discussion, I should say. And that's me. Thank you very much. I'm sorry I went over slightly.
Great. Thank you, Mike. Now I'd like to hand over to Versha from Homes England. Thank you.
Thanks, Victoria. Thanks, Mike. Really appreciate you making time in your holiday. So thanks very much. So morning, everyone. My name's Versha Corrier. I work for Homes England in the affordable housing team. I'm going to spend the next 15 minutes just giving you a really brief introduction to some of the work that we're doing. So next slide, please. So I should say that I'm not a technical MMC expert, modern methods of construction, but I am an affordable housing expert, and part of my role is to make that link. I'm going to cover a bit of context, not too much because we've heard quite a lot already earlier from Jeff and Charlotte. I am going to give you some eyes on to the kind of questions we ask our bidders, just to give you a feel. Then there's some spotlight schemes and a bit of stats, because everyone likes a bit of stats on where we are 1 year into the current affordable housing programme. So next slide, please. So context-wise, I think it's been covered. We know why we're here. We know why we're doing what we do. It was covered earlier. And I think this one slide as an image really does say it all. So moving swiftly on. Next slide. We talked about the economy and the construction. We've already heard from Charlotte earlier on the 5-point plan. All I wanted to say really is that it's a cross-cutting theme for Homes England. So support for MMC is being embedded through our digital colleagues across all of our programmes. It's not just the Affordable Homes programme, but the next 10 minutes or so, we certainly will be covering examples from the Affordable Homes programme. Okay, next slide, please. The Affordable Homes programme, £7.4 billion, so a significant contributor to the delivery of modern methods of construction. For those who don't know, there are two routes to funding. We've procured strategic partners. 31 of them have signed up to the minimum 25% target, and that's delivering the higher 3D and 2D modular, or more than 55% of the home being pre-manufactured. It should be said that there is also funding available ad hoc, site by site, for non-strategic partners. It's called CME. We call it CME. It's continuous market engagement, and we will look at schemes. The useful thing for continuous market engagement is there is interest from local authorities, SME providers, community land trusts, a whole wide range of types of providers, and we look at schemes individually, scheme costs. Overall, the whole programme will report on MMC across 7 categories, and it is at completion. So whilst we want to know as soon as possible, we do acknowledge that things might not be ready at start. When we first look at bid through CME, but the strategic partners have their funding for 5 years, and they are absolutely committed to 25% of the minimum target. So next slide, please. Just a quick reminder, we are using the 7 categories. They are available. They were on the slide earlier, but they are also on the .gov website, and we can post that in the chat for anyone who's interested. And I won't go through the detail. I think there was quite a lot already covered on the 3D, the 2D, right down to site process, site labour reduction. So come and talk to us, or go and have a look on the website. We're here. I'll post my contact details if anyone wants to talk to me about how that fits with the Affordable Homes Programme. Next slide, please. PMV. I see there were a couple of questions about PMV and how it's calculated. Our colleagues from CAST really are experts, but yes, come and talk to us. Go and look at the website. That's also, I think there was a link earlier in the chat, so I won't touch on that. It's a percentage. And for the Affordable Homes Programme, we're looking at any homes that are delivering more than 55%. That's one of our priority areas for funding. If you do that, we will give you a bit more grant, subject to the value for money. Depends where you are on the programme, what the procurement is looking like. So next slide, please. For strategic partners, this is just to give you a visual of the questions we ask on our systems. I know there are partners who love and hate IMS. Strategic partnerships has got a very hard requirement for that 25%. And as you can see, we've got category 1 divided into 4 subcategories to understand the level of 3D that's being provided. We're also capturing the name of the manufacturer, but it goes all the way down to 7 categories. And at the end, the pre-manufactured value. Again, that's a calculation you put in manually. And we would ask that it's populated at the point a scheme and a home is completed. So as soon as possible, but absolutely by completion, please. Next slide, please. This one I put in here for those of our partners who might have bid during the first year of the Affordable Homes Programme, because we were asking for intelligence and data in a layered system. So primary structure, that was your 2D, 3D, some non-primary structure, and then possibly some of the other ones, and they could be mixed and combined in a way that was proving quite complex. And I think the data that it was providing us was a bit of a mixed bag. So it's a heads up to our partners who might be bidding through CME. Please be aware that this screen no longer exists. And if you see the next screen, please, next slide. This is the screen that you now have for IMS. And it is an exact mirror of the strategic partnership. So again, we're looking at category 1 subdivided into exactly what that 3D might look like. Then there's category 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the PMV. Again, we're also asking for confirmation of the manufacturer. And this is just a mock-up. It's not an exact scheme. So the name Top Hat is there for no particular reason. It's just for use. Okay, so those are the some of the digital stuff that we're doing to capture and help the reporting that we've committed to doing as part of our five-point plan with the department. I'm going to move on to the next slide. and share some of the highlights, the things that have come out. We're 1 year into the AHP 21-26, and this slide is the continuous market engagements. If you remember, a range of providers. You don't have to be an RP, but you do if you do have to be an investment partner with us. So CME has allocated around circa 30,000 homes. Of that, 800 of them have been marked down as Cat 1 and 1,800 as Cat 2. That comes to about 18%. And of course, now that we're also monitoring PMV through CME, we expect that figure to go up. The other thing I would observe from the first year into the CME programme, solutions to a lot of the things we've discussed this morning, we've heard from Mike, solutions to procurement, planning, financing, loan funding, whole life costs, supply chain. We are seeing more and more proposals coming forward. There is definite appetite across the sector. Warranties and mortgageability, people are finding solutions, and there's been an awful lot of examples in the chat, and I would encourage people to go through that at some point, and perhaps we can share it. I think we're going to be sharing some of that and the links that we've had. So the good news for us, I think, is that we are seeing a real commitment from our partners to that whole agenda for modern methods of construction. And I see that we did have some questions about how is the link to net zero carbon sustainability also being articulated. I think we needed a bit more work to draw those elements out of the modern methods of construction in the programme, the AHP 21-26. Next slide, please. For the allocations for major strategic partners, the 31 partners for the AHP 21-26, you'll remember I said part of the procurement, it was an absolute requirement to step up to 25%. So we have got the 25%, 22,000 homes are committed to Cat 1 or Cat 2 or the PMV over 55%. So we're really pleased to see that partners were willing to step up and commit over the next 5 years. We do believe that actually as the programme develops and we move beyond year 1, actually early indicators are that the non-MMC section, the dark green on the left, will reduce, and more sites will note as they come online and start on site that they do have elements of 3, 4, 5 as category 7. So really good picture. We're really pleased to see our partners work with us on this. Next slide, please. So the next few slides I thought would be really useful to just showcase some of the schemes that we've grant funded through the Affordable Homes Programme. And I would say, please don't worry about reading the detail. It's there for you to have a look at later when we circulate the slides. This particular scheme is the North Tyneside. It's a small 9 bungalows being delivered by the local authority, and it's called the Husk model. Basically, they're taking some of those hard to reach little garages, taking off the roof, designing a 3D modular bungalow that can be if you take the roof off, slot it in. The scheme's got some renewables, it's got PV systems, as well as source heat pumps, air source heat pumps. And it's a really good example of how you can make use of small garage sites, and we think it could be replicated in other local authority areas, especially where you've got challenging garage sites. So I will speak to our colleagues at Husk and see if we can get some details for them and share them. Next slide, please. This particular example is in Grantham. It's a new investment partner for us, a for-profit housing association. And interestingly, they're not just delivering the 227 homes, that's 100% of the site. Part of it, 140, is affordable homes, but all of it will be the volumetric ILCA product. So we've got new entrants taking loan funding as well as delivering quite significant sites. And you can see at the bottom that they do have quite a traditional look, not so new agey as maybe some of the city centre sites might have. Next slide, please. Bocklock on the Brook, we know it as Airport Road. This is a scheme being brought forward by Bristol City Council. It's fully modular, off-site manufactured. Bocklock, for those who do not know, they are a joint venture between Skanska and IKEA. So they are building 173 homes, 43% of those affordable. We're putting grant in to increase the Section 106 beyond the bare minimum. It's an area of high affordability pressure, and there are both homes for rent, homes for the open market, and low cost home ownership. So we're really pleased to see this. It's also one of the first to be certified using the NHBC's new Flex Build scheme under its Accept service. So we're really interested. Please don't worry about the slides, as Victoria's just put in the chat. We will share them. You can look at the details at your leisure. So next slide, please. This one is Brew Farm, and it's an example where we are enabling both, well, we're enabling MMC through both our land disposal and the affordable housing grant. So the site was disposed of. It's a collaboration between Abri, Keepmoat and Ilka, and then we did convert it to 100% affordable housing using the Ilka Modular Homes product. It's over 75% BMV, so it's 100% Cat 1, and I'm particularly impressed with this one because they are ensuring we have local people from Highbridge who get apprenticeships. So part of that allocation is delivering more than just the affordable housing, the MMC. There is a bit of learning going on. So that's a really quick gallop through some of the examples. The last one, next slide, please, is similar to the RSAP examples that have been discussed earlier. So I won't go into the programme and the background to the Ross Lever accommodation programme. But what we have got here is an example of 2 modular, fully passive house certified 1-bed homes. They are using a derelict garage site in a bit of parking area, and actually they are complete. So, so in Surrey, we've got 2 really high spec, warm, comfortable and complying to building regs scheme in Waverley Borough Council, delivered by Waverley Borough Council. So that's a really quick gallop through the Affordable Homes programme. I will post my contact details and my email address in the chat. So if you have questions, please come talk to me. I'm now handing over to Paul from For Housing.
Thank you, Versha. Really interested in your presentation there. I'm just going to quickly go through a little bit of the work we've done, which starts off with Rough Sleeps accommodation programme, the initial model, then moving forward to MMC. It was good to see Mike's presentation. We are a member of the Offsite Homes Alliance, so I will mention that as part of my presentation. So first slide, please. So I'll give you a little bit of a background about the organisation before I jump into the Rough Sleeps accommodation. So I'm director of For Living, part of the For Housing Group, and we were a stock transfer from Salford Council 14 years ago. And one of the points I'd like to say is that part of the transfer, land did transfer over to the organisation, and that's something that is and will be vital as I go through my presentation. We started off with the Rough Sleeps accommodation phase 1 when we got approached from the local authority and Homes England earlier last year. We took a slightly different approach to the programme. A lot of our people looking to acquire 1-bed flats and just move forward quite quickly with that process. We took a different approach, and we put a real project team approach in place in terms of looking at acquiring what were ex-council properties and converting them from a 3-bed semi-detached property into 2 1-bed flats. So we quite quickly brought a team in place, and on the slide you'll see the partners that we had. Salford City Council were a key partner in not just the homelessness team but the planning team, in terms of making sure we could progress matters really quickly in all the schemes. We brought in an architect stroke employees agent, Whiteley Heaves, who had previous experience with schemes of this nature, and a local contractor, Connolly's, who'd also had previous experience. One of the key things we did also was brought solicitors into the process, and one of the offers that we made two vendors that if we could complete within a short period of time the purchase, we would pay their legal fees, and that worked really well. We constantly and weekly had catch-up meetings with Homes England, Salford Council and all our partners, and the progress on site was really, really positive. So this process in phase one, we acquired 5 properties and we've converted those into 10 one-bed flats, and all of those units handed over and all occupied, and that process has gone well. Next slide, please. We then moved forward with phase 2, and one of the key elements was that we would keep the whole team in place. So phase 2 was the acquisition of 3 properties, and that was to form 6 flats. Again, that process has gone really well. The partnership with Salford Council and the planning team has been critical. So getting the planning approval to convert the units has been something that's worked really well and then worked really quickly. I'm just in the process of finalising the last units within that phase. Again, keeping the same team in place. Next slide, please. Our approach then did slightly start to change. The new bid round came through for the phase 3, and that was linked into the MMC. And our first thoughts there was, could we move that forward quickly with the Offsite Homes Alliance, or would we look at that ourselves? Our approach was to look at that ourselves, and we went into a competitive tender process. So the fortunate thing here for us was that land that transferred from Salford Council to For Housing was land that we could develop on. So we had a number of pieces of land, and the first one here, a site in Earlham, we brought forward. And the site gave us the benefit of being able to do a scheme of 8 one-bed flats, but we also got on the edge of the site a 3-bed 5-person house for social rent. So this has been done in partnership with PLP Construction, a local contractor from the Rochdale area, and we work closely again with Whiteleaf's employees agent, but this time we brought a local architect in, JDA, to act in partnership with us. Again, we work really closely with local residents, work really closely with the planners, and this scheme now, using a timber frame system, has progressed onto site, and work started in March this year, and we should finish by the end of March 2023. So a really good process. Again, Homes England, the support we had from Rob McCartney and Jill Lawson was really important for us to be able to move this scheme forward, and we're really chuffed that this one has moved forward on site. Next slide, please. So our approach now is going to slightly change. So the RSAP phase 4 and phase 5, again, we bid on these phases, and we have been successful on these 2 phases. Our approach here will change slightly, in that we will be looking to develop these sites in partnership and working close with the Offsite Homes Alliance. So we are one of the 23 partners who are working closely with Mike and the other RPs, and we're close now where we want to move forward with through the framework to look how we can develop and deliver these next 2 sites. And this is a small site in Eccles. This will deliver 6 one-bed flats through the Offsite Homes Alliance. We're just about to get the planning application in, and hopefully we'll get a start on site in September 2022 on this one. Next slide, please. This is the phase 5, so we've just had confirmation a couple of weeks ago that we've got a next phase to deliver using MMC. Again, this is something that we'll look to deliver in partnership with the Offsite Homes Alliance. This is for 8 one-bed flats, and this is an infill site, so not a garage site, it's an infill site. Again, land that transferred over, and the fact of having the land transferring over, having the land sat within the organisation has been key for the whole RSAP process, and it's also been key looking at the Offsite Homes Alliance and the modular product that we can look at. And the key thing here has been that we'd already done a lot of site investigation work and initial feasibilities on the sites. We have about 100 sites across Salford. About 30 of those are developable and deliverable. So what we've done historically is done the option appraisals for the sites. We've looked at all the legal packages and worked out what we can do on these sites. The key thing here is that if we had to acquire these sites to do the RSAP programs, the cost of acquiring the sites would make it probably impossible, because land values and land costs, like in all areas, that they're on the increase continually. So the fact that we've got this land in our holdings and that we don't have to go through an actual purchase process has been really helpful. So this site, again, we've just got the allocation through notification during the last 2 weeks. We've got the project team in place already. We had the kickstart meeting already this week. So this is one that we'll be working up over the next couple of weeks, and with a plan to get this on site the end of this calendar year, but more than likely early next year with a completion for March 24. Next slide, please. So the future as well for us and the RSAP programme and modular construction. The first one is that we're looking at another site as well, and we're hoping that'll be another bid round from Homes England coming out. We're looking at that site as a MMC RSAP care leaver accommodation product, something again we'll work closely with Salford Council on. A key across all of the schemes, working closely with Salford Council, is ensure that the revenue funding is in place, and that's something we've secured as well. So the next scheme will be a 4-unit scheme. It will be a care leaver accommodation scheme. That's something we're really keen to move forward. What we've also done as an organisation, we've looked at the other sites that we have in our ownership, and we have other sites that we can develop. So we're looking at those sites to develop those, looking at either mental health deliverable schemes, or learning disability schemes, or even looking at working with ex-services and how we can deliver those schemes. The key for us will be to deliver them through the Offsite Homes Alliance, and we're looking forward to doing that over the next few months and the next couple of years. So our journey on MMC continues, our journey on RSAP continues, and we're looking to move forward with a number of schemes over the next few years. So that concludes my presentation. I think I've gone through it quite quickly, but I'm happy to hand over to Nigel if he's ready to move forward.
Thanks, Paul. So I'm actually taking the Q&A. Nigel, you'll see, Nigel Barclay, who is one of our directors in investment, is manning the chat. So a lot of the questions have been answered by him, which is great. So thanks so much for all the questions that have been coming in the chat. And we've got a few of them that we thought we would bring to the Q&A. And if I could ask all the speakers to turn their cameras back on and their mics back on, and hopefully we'll get everybody's faces up. Wonderful, thank you, welcome back. Thanks for the really interesting presentations, a lot for us all to take on board. If I could start off with one of the early questions that came in, and perhaps we could start with Jeff to begin with. Actually, could I just say, you've got your maybe if you keep your cameras on, turn your mics off until you're speaking, because otherwise we might get lots of echoing. Great, thank you. If we could start with Jeff, we've got one of our first questions said, the concept is admirable, but I query how much variety in appearance, so visual interest, modular homes would have. So I think that this first question is saying, do they all look the same? How beautiful can they be? Could you tell us something about the potential for design for MMC? Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, of course. So I did put something in the chat on this. So just to build on that, I think there's two ways of looking at this. One was that this is why I made the point about optimum PMV versus highest PMV. So design is obviously a really important imperative, and being able to have variety of design to meet a local vernacular is crucial. So I don't think at any stage anyone would advocate for just sort of a cookie cutter modular approach. Every building has to be the same. That works quite well in some of the examples we showed about high rise, where there's complex buildings and doing a lot of it offsite, makes sense. But actually the right way of coming at this, I think, is probably to look at across the MMC categories, and at the site that you're working with, what are my constraints, what are my drivers, and what does that enable me to be able to achieve by incrementally improving the PMV. An example that I put into the chat was of Goldsmith Street, which was commissioned by Norwich Council. It won the Sterling Prize for design 2019, 2020, I think. No one ever talks about it as a modern methods of construction scheme because it wasn't volumetric modular. It used a highly high-performing panelised system, and then was finished off by a main contractor in the way that you normally would build anything. But it won the Sterling Prize for design. And I think this is why it's really important that we think about all of the categories of MMC and all the different ways of building a building. What you can find with panelised systems is that it creates much more capability for you to be able to vary the design, to react to a local need. And really overall, I think where the sector will end up going is towards this concept of mass customization, where you customize a lot of the parts of different buildings, but you don't customize the way they're put together. So that then, so you mass produce the bits and then you customize how they're put together. And someone mentioned a kit of parts approach that's being sponsored by Homes. It's exactly in that sort of space. You look for process efficiency, but you don't look to do the same thing over and over again.
Wonderful, fantastic. Do we have any thoughts from anyone else on the panel of your experiences there? Would anyone shout if you'd like to say something? Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question.
I think, Victoria, I was just going to say, I spotlighted a number of different schemes, and I think you could see that, as Jeff was saying, some of the more high-rise do tend to look similar, but actually we've got quite rural schemes. We've got the hybrid scheme in Brew Farm. You know, they look just like traditional family homes. You couldn't tell they were MMC.
And Neil, I think you're ready to say something too. Brilliant. And you come.
Yeah, just to add really to Jeff and Versh's comments, that as part of the exercise now of rolling out modular wider across our organisation, myself and a colleague have met with a number of different modular providers, and I have to say that I haven't seen 2 units that look the same. Now, I'm happy to share that list outside of this meeting with people that would like to see it, of the providers that were recommended to us and that we've met with. But I'm sure if you did some of your own looking on that and sort of a bit of research, you'd see that there is quite a depth of variety in the, you know, the appearance and layout of these units. So yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, let's move on to the next question. There are a few related to the carbon impact of delivering modular units. So I'll start with this first one, which says just that. What is the carbon impact of delivering modular units which take up more space? And then related to that, we have a further question. It would be good to understand how you measure the long-term value of having the option to deconstruct and reuse some of the elements of MMC. So I think that is connected. But if we start with the first, and then we can come to that one. Jeff, would you like to start us off with what is the carbon impact?
Again, I shared a link in the chat to a recent study by HTA and Cambridge University, Napier University in Edinburgh, that put some numbers on the benefits of using MMC for a carbon perspective. So that's worth looking at. I think that's probably one of the first hard bits of evidence that there is. So what I would say is a lot of this is logical thinking, and you know, in theory, it makes a lot of good sense why MMC would drive carbon benefits. So the 2 ways I look at it is around operational carbon. So to get to a net zero operational carbon home, you might look at renewable energy sources and things like that, but you also really need highly efficient fabric to be able to achieve that. And MMC solutions tend to be able to achieve a higher level of fabric efficiency because of the quality of manufacture. And particularly if you look at category 2 SIP systems, so insulated panels, the more insulated versions of the frame solutions, those tend to achieve higher levels of fabric efficiency and can achieve passive house type standards more readily than traditional construction. That's the first way of looking at it. And then if you look at it from the embodied carbon point of view, the benefits tend to come from lower waste in terms of actually the less material is used because less material is wasted in the construction process. Less journeys are made, so less travel needs to take place because actually the consolidation of the manufacture happens on a site, and then there's fewer transport journeys, which is better from a carbon in travel and also from an air quality point of view. Those are the principal benefits that we can kind of conceptualize and get our heads around, I think, at this stage. That's where the benefits come from. And like I said, I think that HTA example is a really good example of some actual data that's starting to come out to verify that. One of the follow-up questions was, how does that apply to rural developments, lower rise housing? I think the same principles apply. I think, you know, that's still the same place where you go to get your benefits from those 3 main sources of benefit. What I would say is that we looked at those, like the Grey Star scheme in the middle of Croydon, the 40-storey George Lane tower. When you get into those sort of complex high-rise developments, you do get a lot of material benefits from category 1 solutions because of the complexity of the building, which you can't really replicate into one house. So there's a quantum difference, but the same principles apply. That, you know, fewer journeys, better performance, lower waste is where the benefit comes from.
Brilliant, fantastic. You just referred to a site that did sound like quite a constrained site, and that links back to, again, one of the earlier questions that we had on, are there any good examples of MMC in complex, constrained city centre sites? And I think we've had quite a few of those, but it would be good to get reflections from the panel about the complexity and the challenges of working in those kind of sites. I mean, we've had a number of sites that Versha showed us, but I wonder, excuse me, would any of you like to come in to think about the challenges of a constrained site and then some practical thoughts on how to overcome those? Who'd like to start us off there?
I'm happy to start just around the point of, for us, and the complex nature of the individuals that we work with. Actually, you know, we've not really explored that approach too heavily because a city or town centre location isn't always ideal for, you know, some of the more complex and chaotic individuals that we work with. So I'm sure that there are other implications around sort of expense and things like that. But for us and our customer group, we wouldn't typically look for that sort of location anyway, just because it's not appropriate in terms of their rehabilitation and support, really.
Thank you. Good point. Jeff?
Yeah, so just to go back to a couple of examples that I flew through in my presentation, I think actually complex city centre sites, in a way, they demand a modern methods of construction approach, because land is expensive, time is expensive, and the investor wants a return on their money really fast. So the narrative and the kind of the business case for doing things faster, it tends to be stronger, I think, in city centre locations. And I showed two examples of how that works. So we showed again the Croydon scheme, which was a grey star, fully volumetric. And that's actually the example that's used in the case study around carbon. So that's one way of doing it. But I think the key issue there is it's a complex city centre site, but not very constrained. So quite easy to get traffic into it. And that was key. So that enables you to be able to get 3D modules in. So the key constraint then is, can I get a 3D module, and can I get a lot of them in and onto site in an efficient kind of way? The other one that I showed was the site, the former Olympic Village, N06, N08, which are being built for DLUHC by Mace Tech. So this is a main contractor now that's developed a different way of building complex sites. So it uses panels, it uses prefabricated componentry, but doesn't do it in a two-dimensional manner. And then it kind of brings all of those together on site and builds up with that. And that's a constrained site where it's not easy to get a fully volumetric solution. So in the presentation, there were two examples of it, and also not to plug too heavily, but in the MMC market free tool that I mentioned in my presentation, there's got a searchable list of MMC projects in there. So it's always worth a quick look.
I think it's also worth returning to the point that MMC is a range of technologies. So I think it's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking about modular when we talk about MMC, but actually panelized pods, components, that all works really well within constrained sites and constrained access often.
Brilliant, fantastic. We have a question here, again, quite a practical question, and it may have been addressed in the chat, but just in case people haven't seen it, I would like to know what type of substructure is suitable for volumetric units. Again, Jeff, would you like to start us off with that?
Yeah, so actually there's no massive difference in terms of substructure requirements to if the building was built traditionally. I think you do end up with a category 1 system, you do end up with more structure, simply because those modules are kind of over-engineered, so they last the journey. They're put on a truck and they have to survive that journey. So typically you do end up with a bit more structure in a category 1 solution than you would if you built it traditionally, but not so much that it sort of substantively affects the type of substructure that you need. The other thing I'd say is that there are MMC versions of substructures. So in that category definition framework, in category 3, you can look at offsite or prefabricated types of ring piles, ring beams, and other types of foundation systems that also count as MMC and will give you more PMV in your application to Homes England and that sort of thing. I think as a general rule, the MMC system itself doesn't really dictate the substructure particularly. I mean, the one in Croydon, what you tend to find in the big high rises is you get a podium and then the modules go on top, and the sort of ground floor is a commercial area built out of concrete, and then everything goes on top to carry the weight. But otherwise in sort of low rise, it's pretty similar, I think.
Thank you. interesting detail there. So we have a question. We've gone from the practical to a more strategic policy question here. And I was wondering, Charlotte, if you could take us through this one. It's just come in the chat. Is there anything a local plan can do on a practical basis through policy to support MMC?
Yeah, sure. So something we hear all the time is that planning is often a barrier to kind of greater use of MMC, particularly the speed at which it takes place. That can kind of slow down and you lose some of the benefits that you get from the fast rollout of MMC building. But just signalling support for MMC in your local area, it would be massively appreciated by the MMC sector. I think they feel that they have to do a kind of education piece a lot about what MMC is and what it isn't. So something that says that you will kind of look favourably on, or you want to see development that includes MMC is very helpful. And that's within the National Design Code, and something we're kind of keen to see within the local design codes as well. And then within that, kind of not being too prescriptive. I think we hear kind of people get ruled out by not having quite the right roof height, or there's a lot of design flexibility still within MMC. You can change the facades and change the layouts, but things like that can kind of add cost and complexity to projects and make it less viable. We're also aware of some local authorities have done a sort of planning passport, so pre-approval on standard designs, partnered with a specific manufacturer to do that, and that helps kind of get through the speed point. So that's not something as national government that we require, but it might be something that's worth looking at.
Okay, thank you. I think you've all mentioned different geographies, the rural versus the urban, the more constrained sites, and thinking about the end users' needs as well. But one question that's popped up is, do we have any examples, or do you know of any MMC schemes that have been built within conservation areas? I don't know if this is something that's anyone's aware of. Bit of conversation in the chat. Anybody have thoughts on that? So it sounds like we don't really as a panel. And maybe it'd be good to see whether anybody who's here as an attendee has got any examples to share, so we get a bit of peer-to-peer support.
There's a couple of examples posted in the chat, but I haven't done the analysis of the Affordable Homes Programme to see. I mean, we've got a couple of schemes in Bath, but I couldn't guarantee they're in a conservation area. I'll have to go and check.
Absolutely, fantastic, thank you. So what I think we'll do is we've got 1 minute until 2 o'clock. We've had a great morning. We've had some really interesting speakers. Thank you so much for your time and for attendees' time and spending the whole morning with us. Why don't we have a lunch break? You can have some food, you can also answer some emails. And if you could all come back a few minutes before 2 o'clock, that would be great. Don't log off, just make sure that you've muted, you've turned your camera off, and we'll see you back here a few minutes before 2. We've got a great afternoon with some more really interesting speakers, and we'll see you then. Thank you. Okay, good afternoon and welcome back. This is the Homes England Local Government Capacity Centre Summer Learning Programme session on an introduction to modern methods of construction. So we're going to take you through a number of things this afternoon. We heard from a range of speakers this morning, and this afternoon we've got a number of more case studies and some experts in the field. So I'm welcoming you back, and then we're going to hear from Neil Guthrie from Sunderland City Council, then Gaynor Tennant from Offsite Alliance. Dave Sheridan is joining us from Ilka Homes, and Verity Davidge from Make UK. And then we're going to have a panel Q&A. And for that, it'd be great if you could pop your questions into the chat and like those that you would particularly like to have asked this afternoon. We've got some Homes England specialists who are going to try and answer as many things in the chat as possible, but we'll go into some more detail during the Q&A. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our first speaker, and that's Neil Guthrie from Sunderland City Council. Thank you.
So, yes, hello everybody, I'm Neil Guthrie. My predominant role is as Residential Development Director for Sunderland City Council, overseeing our strategic programme of development, but also our wider approach to delivering better lifestyles for the people of Sunderland. So this afternoon, I'm going to provide a bit of an insight into our strategic ambitions around MMC and the role of MMC in supporting strategic change in the way we deliver housing across Sunderland. Also introduce you to Riverside Sunderland, which is our strategic city centre regeneration scheme, and then briefly hand over to my colleague David Allwood, who's going to talk you through our pioneering Vaux housing development, which includes the government's Home of 2030 design competition winners. So if we can move on to the next slide. So Sunderland is a remarkable city. We've shown great resilience and adaptability in transitioning from an economy which has been based on traditional heavy industries and a move towards being a connected international city. We're a leader in advanced manufacturing, technology and software, and we've seen significant growth in our health and cultural sectors. We're trying to apply these changes and these success stories to how we go about delivering new homes and communities, as we still face a host of challenges as a city that we need to address. So one of the biggest challenges we face is outward migration. We've been very successful over the last 20 years in developing around the periphery of our city. We've hollowed out the city centre. It no longer performs as an economic motor. There's not a very good housing choice. People generally live in the city centre because they need to, rather than because they want to. We have concentrations of poverty and deprivation. Skills, qualifications are generally poor relative to other parts of the country. And we have depressed land and property values, which have stymied investor and developer appetite for developing in our city. So a sort of host of challenges that we need to address. So in 2019, we launched our city plan, which is our framework for social and economic growth. That included a number of objectives, including creating more and better jobs, providing greater housing choice, delivering higher quality energy efficient homes as part of a wider strategy to create a low carbon and digital economy. We really want to establish successful neighbourhoods and communities with rich cultural life where we can help people live longer, happier, healthier lives. And really, we believe that MMC has a critical role into achieving and addressing all of these objectives. MMC isn't just about the technicalities of delivering a home. It's about the way the home performs, the way it performs as part of the community and what it offers to future residents. So next slide, please. We thoroughly believe there needs to be a longer term strategy for MMC and housing delivery across our city and across wider region that isn't driven by political or parliamentary terms, sporadic funding programmes, endless data collection and evaluation, and something that recognises the definite north-south divide and some of the regional challenges which make the use of MMC more difficult in our region. So Sunderland's embarked on the creation of a housing ecosystem, which is our strategic plan for the delivery of housing regeneration across our city. So that will allow us to secure the land, resources and supply chain to address our development needs and accelerate housing delivery. We're also diversifying our housing product and tenure solutions through the use of MMC to make housing more accessible and attract the population back to the city centre. And we're seeking strategic public and private sector investment to supplement our own commitments and expedite our housing regeneration programme. Development in our area is difficult. We have to speculate and take risk as a local authority. And we believe that by investing early we can bring the private sector along behind us, and we're already seeing the fruits of that approach through some of the investment in Riverside, Sunderland. Next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier that MMC isn't just about homes. We believe to successfully implement MMC as a strategy and a delivery option, then we need to significantly upskill and reskill our population. So through a partnership with Sunderland College, our local technical college in Moby, we're delivering a new housing innovation and construction skills academy. This will be a state-of-the-art learning facility. It's backed by £10 million of levelling up fund investment. And we believe it's a real opportunity for us to work with industry and with academia to inspire the housing professionals and housing workforce of the future. Creating that link between academia and industry is really important, and it will help us to ensure that the skills of local people meet the future needs of the industry, particularly in the housing supply chain. You know, in time, there'll be a need for more multi-skilled operatives, less specific trades, less wet trades as we move to an advanced off-site manufacturing approach. It'll help us to facilitate research and development and support our wider retrofit and decarbonisation programmes. One of the biggest improvements will be to help us retain and attract talent to live and work in the city, but also to the construction industry. I think MMC is critical for protecting the industry. At the moment, it's not an attractive offer, particularly in our part of the world. The weather isn't kind to us. You know, young people don't want to enter the construction industry. They don't want to work 10 stories up a tower block in a gale force wind and throwing down rain. So, you know, introducing technology and advancement and working off-site will be far more attractive to younger people. Next slide, please. So, moving on from the skills, employment training, we're working with Homes England and the Offsite Alliance and other strategic partners to establish a regional offsite manufacturing hub. We see that as the next step in our ecosystem. So once we've created the resource and the technical capability, then we want to roll out a framework that's part of a national strategy for delivery of MMC that can address, like I said earlier, specific challenges within our region and our policy goals. Next slide, please. So we're specifically looking to build on the successful growth of the automotive industry within our city. So, you know, Nissan is a great success story. They've grown a supply chain around them. You know, it's extremely sustainable as a business, and there are a lot of transferable skills and technology and experience that can be applied to the housing industry. You know, Nissan and the automotive industry has really diversified into electric vehicles, which is seeing the end of, you know, the combustion engine, and they're managing to do that at pace. You know, housing has generally struggled to do that, and we need to find ways and learnings from the automotive industry that we can apply to the MMC sector. So we want to work with regional, local partners, create a more coordinated supply chain, manage supply and demand, improve aggregation that will help us to allow, you know, aligned development with manufacturing capacity. We're seeking to provide dedicated facilities for regional SMEs, so people looking to enter the MMC sector or scale up their operations. We're trying to create a scenario where there's co-location, where we can encourage and optimize collaboration and knowledge share. I think it's really important for the success of MMC that there's increased standardization of products and components, but also increased flexibility and flexibility of use. So, you know, a wall panel or a piece of kit isn't specifically limited to one system. It could be used across systems. That helps us to prevent market failure and give more certainty and more volume to smaller size companies, and prevent against market failure, which has been obviously quite rife in the industry to date. We're also keen to avoid replication of the traditional housing market, which suffers from, you know, market dominance from 5 or 6 players who are, you know, got heavy equity backing, and has generally led to a drive to the bottom. We're really intent on protecting and maintaining quality, but having the right supply chain around the sector to do that. Next slide, please. So we really want to deliver high quality housing and homes, accelerate the delivery programme, establish new communities across our region. And MMC can provide a host of benefits in doing that. It really plays a critical role in delivering against a wide range of policies such as employment, decent homes, low carbon, innovation, digitalisation, social and economic growth. This is way beyond just housing, and that sort of really hammers home the importance of having a collective and collaborative MMC strategy. So in terms of development, we obviously, as a local authority, we're looking for opportunities to deliver at scale. There've obviously been a number of pilot projects around MMC and innovation, but everybody's looking to move to the next step. So we're intervening to address market failure on some of our strategic brownfield development sites that have stood redundant for a number of years, but provide huge opportunity to deliver large new communities using MMC. So the first of those is Riverside Sunderland, which is our flagship carbon neutral urban quarter that we're delivering at the heart of the city, which is a site that was previously in the ownership of Tesco. We've took that back and are really starting to drive forward development and regeneration and put Sunderland back on the map. So Riverside Sunderland will deliver around about 1,000 new homes in 4 new residential neighbourhoods. All of these homes will be delivered using MMC, low carbon, smart and digital technology. We see it as being pioneering for the city, pioneering for the region, and provides a real opportunity for us to instigate some of the changes I've talked about, engage industry, and change the mindset around the delivery of MMC at scale. I can't reinforce enough, we need to move away from pilot projects. Monitoring, evaluation, research and development is great, but ultimately as a city and a country, we need to start delivering. So through early investment and our commitment to quality, we're looking to disrupt the market, unlock long-term investment, and take a different view to how we sort of fund and develop new homes. We've secured around about £40 million of central government funding to date to support the Riverside Sunderland scheme. And we've submitted a much wider ask to government around our holistic ecosystem, which is well over £100 million. So we're really thinking big here. We're really trying to force a change, and we really want to support the growth of the MMC sector. So David, if I can hand over to you just to provide a bit of an insight into Vaux Housing and the Home of 2030.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. So the first residential community on Riverside Sunderland will be the Vaux Housing, which will be situated on the old Vaux Brewery site, and will lead the way in the innovation of new houses in Sunderland. It's been designed to radically change people's perception of urban living, with the aim of helping to repopulate our city centre. When complete, the scheme will comprise of 135 highly sustainable dwellings in the heart of the city centre. The scheme will be utilising MMC Category 2 technology, using a closed panel timber system and light gauge steel. This will result in 114 units being built to 2025 Future Home Standard, which is a 75% plus reduction in carbon emissions. And we're pleased to also develop 21 units that are going to be built to Passive House standard. At the start of the process, we had an ambition for the whole of the scheme to be delivered to Passive House standard. However, the procurement process highlighted the current limitations the leading MMC timber frames and contractors have in terms of meeting airtightness performance, which meant that we had to reevaluate this. The other important lesson we learned is that if you're looking to use timber frame supplier to deliver your scheme, that is important to bring them in early to the process, to work with the design team to ensure what is designed by the architects can actually be built, as the standardization of some of the systems often restricts change and has already highlighted the level of performance possible. So I'd like to just talk a little bit now about an initiative called the Home of 2030. So originally launched in March 2020, the Home of 2030 scheme was a design competition launched by DLUHC, created to drive innovation in the provision of affordable, efficient and healthier green homes for all. In December 2020, DLUHC announced the joint winners of the Home of 2030 competition. Those were Plus Home, which was designed by Igloo Regeneration and Mawson Kerr, and Connector Housing, designed by Open Studio. They were joint winners of the competition. As Igloo and Mawson Kerr were already key members of the design team on the wider Vaux housing scheme, we had discussions with representatives from DLUHC around delivering the joint winners schemes as part of the Vaux site. DLUHC were supportive of this idea to showcase the winning designs and have provided a grant of £2 million to help us deliver the Home of 2030 winners designs as part of the wider Vaux housing site. Next slide, please. The scheme will consist of 16 dwellings that will form the gateway into the Vaux housing site, as you can see in the top left-hand side of the slide. There will be a range of house types spanning 1-bed apartments, 2-bed duplexes, and a 3-bed family house, which will cater for multi-generational living and ageing residents. Utilising an MMC Category 2 timber frame, Plus Home and Connector House will be built to reduce their energy demand and consumption. They will be using air source heat pumps, photovoltaics and battery technology to provide low carbon heat and maximise the use of renewable energy. The proposals aim to reduce whole life carbon impacts, minimise both embodied and operational carbon. In all, this will result in a carbon reduction against Part L regulations of circa 84%. To showcase the Home of 2030 dwellings and the wider trends in future living, Sunderland City Council will be hosting Expo Sunderland in 2024. And at this point, I'll hand back to Neil, who's going to talk a little bit more about that.
Okay, so Expo Sunderland is a real opportunity for us to inspire a generation, showcase our achievements across Vaux, Home of 2030 and Riverside, and really engage housing professionals and policymakers in MMC, digital technology, and the journey to net zero. We want to engage our people in more active communities, aspirational lifestyles, and promote the skills and talent of local people and local businesses. I think across Riverside, Sunderland, we're seeking to use innovative construction technologies. So we're building the houses using MMC, but we're also delivering other parts of the regeneration using off-site advanced manufacturing techniques. So we've got a new bridge which crosses the river. It spans almost 240 metres, and we're intending to prefabricate significant sections of that off-site to reduce the exposure and reduce the programme as much as we can. I think we intend to have one of the biggest crane lifts in history to lift the bridge sections into place. We're delivering sort of multi-storey car parks that help us to move cars out of the community to the edge of the development. And again, we're using system and modern methods of construction to deliver those facilities. So it's not just about the housing. We've also applied policy, planning policy, documentation, design guides, which allow us to control development as it comes forward. Like I mentioned earlier, we're driving the initial phases of the regeneration, but equally we're seeking the private sector to come along behind us. But they'll very much need to reflect our ambition, our goals, and our aims. So we've been quite proactive in getting ahead of ourselves with policy. We've got strong political leadership. As a city, we've committed to being low carbon or carbon neutral by 2030. So as a council, and then as a city by 2045. So we're setting really ambitious targets. and we're looking to work with our partners, our stakeholders, and with industry to help us achieve that. And you know, through the work that we're doing, we really believe that, you know, housing and MMC provides a real opportunity for us to transform our city and change mindsets. So if we can move on to the final slide, please. I just wanted to leave you with a few key messages around MMC. We do believe there's a need for change and a need for intervention and adopting a much more strategic approach. You know, our people now demand quality, choice, and flexibility in their homes and lifestyles. You know, we need to move away from some of the expected or accepted norms around housing, and MMC provides a real opportunity to do that. We need to educate, innovate, and inspire. You know, Riverside, Sunderland, Forks housing, that's all for the future generation. We need to create an industry for future generations. We've seen in our city more than most what happens when industry fails, and we need to be the forefront of technology and MMC. We need to establish the sustainable supply chain. You know, it's not just about building a factory. You know, it's about implementing a supply chain around it, and we can learn a lot from the automotive industry and the successes that they've delivered. And collaboration is really key for delivery at scale. We need healthy competition, but not to the degree that everybody's cutting their own throats or there's a drive to the bottom. We really need to work together to find solutions that tackles, you know, the shortages on a local and national scale. And we need a vision and ambition, you know, and we believe as a local authority that we're trying to drive the agenda, and working with partners like Homes England and DLUHC. You know, we really think that our region and the UK as a whole can thrive in the MMC sector. So that was an insight into what we're doing at Sunderland and the approach we're taking. I'll now hand over to Gainer Tennant, one of our partners from the Offsite Alliance.
Thank you, Neil and David. That was really good to have a catch up on Sunderland and where you're up to. So I'm Gainer Tennant. I am founder and chair of the Offsite Alliance. So today I'm going to give you an overview into lots of little bits and try not to go into too much detail. So I'm going to talk about kind of an overview of the industry, why the industry needs to change, where do you start on your journey to offsite. Offsite is a process, not a product, and we need to think differently. And then finally, what can the Offsite Alliance do to help you? So could I jump forward to 2 slides, please? Perfect, thank you. So the Offsite Alliance is quite an accidental business, if I'm perfectly honest with you. I used to work for a company called Modularize, and Modularize are very, very ingrained in the offsite industry. They design new products for the market, set up factories, and deliver quite a lot of projects from an architectural basis. And really, it was born out of my frustration. I started in the sector about 7 years ago with no knowledge of manufacturing and construction, but none of it makes sense to me about why on earth we will build the way we build. So in 2019, we held a couple of round tables to see if the manufacturers would start working together, because they were all working in silos. And they were trying to create this mythical IP and how a building goes together. So we held a couple of round tables. We set about meeting Homes England and managed to raise a whopping 86 million. And then we thought, this is very real, there's a need and a want for it. So I set the organisation up as a non-for-profit organisation with a large membership body. So we now have about 180 members. Really varies in our membership across the construction sector. So everything, we've got lawyers, architects, a lot of manufacturers and a lot of building product suppliers as well, all looking at change the way we kind of build our homes and drive the change needed. Essentially what we do is we work to unite the industry and bring people together. We promote best practice through sharing of knowledge and innovation. We advocate for offsite, and most importantly, we connect the dots between people and businesses. So could I have the next slide, please? So this is a slide just designed to make you think a little bit. In the first half of the last century, Wilbur and Orville Wright took to the skies On the 1st of December in 1913, Henry Ford commissioned his first moving assembly line for the mass automation of cars. And as the world watched on in a summer's day, in 1956, mankind took his first steps on the moon. Now, you may be wondering how this was related, but 6,000 years ago, the Mesopotamian people invented a method for casting clay bricks, which was probably one of the first examples of off-site construction we've seen. And since then, nobody's come along really and thought that this takes an awful long time to stack these bricks and I need a lot of skilled labour. So the way we build our homes hasn't really changed. Can I have the next slide, please? But today we are starting to see a huge number of problems across the construction sector. And I think we've reached the tipping point on an awful lot of these points. These are just a few that are put on the slide for you to have a look at, which I'm pretty sure that the majority of you, if you're involved in the house building sector, are coming across these problems. And if you haven't hit them yet, you are about to hit them. I think most important for me, the ones that are really jumping out at the moment as a significant problem are the skills shortage. So we're about to lose 750,000 construction workers in the next 15 years. Another interesting fact is only 3% of students that are 16 to 18 look for construction related courses, and then we only retain 41% of those that enter the industry. And what are we doing wrong? Lots of things. We're not teaching our kids that construction's cool. I think another one is obviously the chronic housing shortfall. We need to build a huge number of homes and we need to do that fast. And I'm not saying that they will all be built off-site. We're never going to go to a place where everything's built off-site or MMC. We're going to go to a happy mix where we start to improve the productivity of the sector. And then lastly, I think the other big one for me is we need to reduce our carbon budget by 68% by 2030. And the construction sector accounts for a huge amount of those carbon emissions. So at the OA, though, we're truly fed up about hearing about barriers. We're not ones to sit back and do nothing. We are solution providers. A lot of the industry that are forward thinking are our membership. So what we've done, you'll notice, is we've titled this slide Enablers for Offsite, because we believe that many of these challenges, if done right, can be drastically reduced or slowed by or solved by the uptake of offsite. So next slide, please. So where do you start on your offsite journey? It's quite a minefield, and if you've never embarked on it before, then it's a really difficult kind of process to get your head around. It needs a different mindset and a behavioural change. But there's lots of things out there at the moment that are there to help you make that move to a more simple way of putting a project together, thinking about how you design from the outset. And I think one of the biggest outcomes we've had this year from the Construction Innovation Hub is the Value Toolkit. It's essentially a toolkit that makes you think about why you're doing what you're doing. And I think it follows on really nicely from Neil and David from Sunderland, because it's about that value that new housing can create in a local authority. It's just a set of toolkits that can help you break the cycle from race to the bottom and make you redefine where that value comes from. And we really need to start balancing those short-term outcomes and long-term outcomes. And that's what you'll see in offsite construction, thinking more. A lot of people say, oh, it's more expensive. It is more expensive at the moment, but actually, what are the benefits that you're driving at the end of those projects? There's been a significant shift, I think, recently in how people are working together in the construction sector. And the Value Toolkit does stem from a huge amount of collaboration across industry and government partners. It's a pioneering set of tools, and they'll be used to embed value-based decision-making into projects from the very, very start of a project. So if you've not yet picked this up, please do. If you can't find it, drop any of us an email, and I'm pretty sure that we'll be able to send you in the right direction. The Offsite Alliance are also running a series of webinars as well in order to help you understand this. So Ellie Jenkins from Akerlof will be running them for us. So if you'd like to learn more, please do just pop along to the website. You might be asking, how does this relate to me as a local authority, and how does this relate to offsite construction? Can I have the next slide, please? So off-site construction just means that part of the building is built away from site and then it's transported to site and installed. And when we start to think of it as a process, it starts to make it a little bit easier. So you'll notice in my slides, you won't see MMC, because I don't think off-site construction is new. I've referred back to the Mesopotamian people. I think it's a process and it should be normalised within the construction sector. It's a process to achieving all those value-driven outcomes that you've defined at the beginning of the project that you'll get at the end. So it'll lead to generally a reduced programme, you'll get improved quality, better health and safety, and hopefully it'll help you define those outcomes. We need to think about changing the way we build, and we need to really think of it as a process. Can I go to the next slide, please? So as I said, designing for offsite is a really key part, and you will need to think about running offsite projects slightly differently. It should mean that you have less contracts to manage, and you need less engagement from a main contractor if you do it right. But if you really need to reap the benefits of offsite construction, you need to think about how you go about your projects, and the design must come first. So you can't go to a traditional architect and say, please design me this scheme, and then go to a manufacturer and hope that it will work. You need engagement with your manufacturing supply chain very early. You need to make sure that you're appointing the correct project teams. So does your architect understand working with that manufacturer, and do they understand how to design for offsite? You will need a project manager who is a specialist in running an offsite project, who will understand that the process is differently. But this is the biggest part that you will reap the benefits of offsite if you design right from the outset. And a big term that you'll hear when it comes to design is design for manufacture and assembly. So when we're designing offsite, we need to factor in a lot of other things that we need to think about. But DFMA is essentially all about how we can design a product to be consumed by the manufacturing process as quickly as possible with as little waste as possible. So what we're trying to do is get it from A to B in the factory as quick as possible. Conventionally, what normally happens is that an architect will come along and they'll focus on building aesthetics and design. They'll focus a lot on the interior as well and how that space works or how the site works. But they often overlook how the building is going to be built until technical design at REBA stage 4. That's too late for offsite. We need to be thinking about that a lot earlier. And it doesn't mean having a lot of extra cost. It simply means going to the right team of architects that know what they're doing from the outset and appointing the correct project teams. DFMA really is just about breaking down a building into components. They are then optimized for efficiency. There'll be an improvement factor in there where they can go next. They'll be optimized for cost efficiency as well. And then importantly, they'll be optimized for transport and on-site assembly. For me, DFMA makes perfect sense. I don't really understand why the construction sector hasn't adopted it widely across every project they do. At the moment, they just build things and then hope it works. And if it doesn't work, they fix it on site. DFMA is bringing that thinking earlier, making sure that that project will work from the outset. And one of my favourite analogies of this is, can you imagine Ford building a car with a plan, a section and elevation? They can't. They need much more detail. So when I talk about reaping the benefits, I will always refer back to that early engagement piece. I'll always refer back to appointing the correct project teams from the outset and the fact that that design must come first. Some of the factories have got products already ready for you, homes already that you can buy off the shelf that they're running through their lines at the moment. It'd be great if we can get to that standardization as quick as possible, because that means we can get more houses out. And you'll hear a lot about platforms and standardization and all of these terms. It doesn't mean you're going to get a boring house. We have a huge number of case studies on the system somewhere. So if anybody wants to see how beautiful these houses are, then please give us a shout. Finally, I want to come to what the OA are doing to help you. Can I have the next slide, please? So the Offsite Alliance have got 7 strategic work streams, and this is where the industry's got together with a number of problems that they're all encountering at the same time, and they've defined some objectives, and then we invite anybody to join that wants to join. We go out to key stakeholders to find out who should be there, and and we map what works already out there. It's really, really important to us that we're not duplicating effort. If there's somebody out there doing something, we just want to team up and we want to help where possible. We've now, in the ones that are up and running, managed to define short-term and longer-term goals to deliver the change that's needed. So the 3 that are up and running are my skills and competencies, my design integration, and my technical solutions, all very different. And the other 3 are about to start within the next 3 months. They are a huge amount of work, though, in order to get them up and running. So the skills and competencies one is really interesting. They've been going the longest, and they've probably got further than any other at the moment. They are mapping out competencies, a digital competency framework for future skills, because in the future we'll start to see a lot of different skills that are needed, and I think we need to start to pick up on those softer skills. I always think about sort of a kinesthetic, hands-on, practical person, and we pigeonhole them down one route, sort of a bricklayer or a plasterer, and I'm pretty sure any of them can go into a factory and complete many tasks in the factories. So it's taking ripping apart the roles that we've got at the moment and looking at what are the strengths needed to complete those roles. Alongside of that, we've got the apprenticeships and T-levels group that have just submitted an expression of interest for a multi-skilled operative apprenticeship, a level 2. That's a longer term outcome because it's going to take about 3 years to do that, apparently, as much as we need it now. And then we've got our college network. So we've got a network of 72 further education colleges that are all working in a network to discuss what they do about future skills, to share resources as well. We've got the training provider network that sits alongside of that, which we are teaching the teachers at the moment because the teachers are ex-trades and they can't upskill. So we're doing short courses with them at the moment and trying to get them out into the workplace to do some work experience so they can then teach the students. And then lastly, our primary school group, which it's all good and well writing courses and training teachers, but if we don't fill the courses, the construction courses, there's no point in doing it. So we've got primary school group is writing a book called The 4 Little Pigs, should be ready by the end of the year. Fourth Little Pig delivers a modular house, and the wolf represents climate change, which surprisingly isn't on our curriculum anywhere at the moment. So that's quite an exciting one. The others I won't talk about as much because they're not as fun. I love the skills. The design integration is focused around raising awareness with architects, PMs and QSs. They're writing a design guide to volumetric construction at the moment. That be open source to the industry, thinking about transport logistics, but also thinking about building regs and how do we bring that design a little bit earlier. Technical solutions is my nitty gritty technical work stream that they sit on the BSI committee for new standards for offsite construction. And then my procurement, digital transformation and planning are about to start. The market awareness one I've come back to because I think that is more relevant to the audience here today. Can I have the next slide, please? So we've written a few courses that are there available for anybody that wants to learn more about offsite. The Offsite Alliance are here to help. The first one is a short, can be done as a webinar, an hour presentation followed by a Q&A. It's just a simple introduction to offsite. This is the one we're doing a lot with the teachers in the colleges at the moment. So it talks about materials, systems, warranty accreditation, early engagement, design, and then we have a raft of case studies to go alongside that. We're happy to join groups of people as well on that. So if anybody's interested, they can certainly just get in touch. Next slide, please. Then the next one we are just developing out at the moment is a 1 to 3 day event called Offsite Made Simple. And this will show you how to run a project from start to finish. So session 1, we'll look at the concept stages. So we're going to look at the REBA stages, the DFMA overlay. We're going to look at procurement, construction playbook and value toolkit. Session 2 is pre-construction. So you'll hear a lot about platforms and optioneering around the contracts that need to be used. We need to be moving more towards collaborative contracts, your design outputs, and again, the value toolkit. And then session 3 is all about that construction phase. So what happens in the factory? We're going to look at vesting, cash flow, and then handover, of course, and continuous improvement. Next slide, please. And then the next outcome that will be really useful is delivering off-site homes. So this is going to be focused on categories 1, 2 and 5, which are your components, panels and your boxes in the simplest terms. So we're going to look at what is off-site construction, key drivers, procurement, logistics, design and manufacturing. So this will be available to be downloaded off our website. Again, open source, it's free to use. So I'll let you know when that becomes available. So my key takeaways are, do face up to the challenges, don't hide behind them and just carry on doing what we've always been doing. Ask lots and lots of questions, my favourite motto. Offsite is a process, not a product. It's really important to remember that one size will never fit all. So what might be right for one site might not be right for another, or you might find that it works time and time again. Appoint the correct project teams, engage early, and most importantly, the OA are here to help and collaboration is key. So that's all from me. Thank you very much for listening today. We're going to go to a quick comfort break now. So I think it's a 5-minute comfort break. And when we come back, we're going to hear from Dave Sheridan from Ilka Homes. So from a manufacturer's perspective. Thank you all.
Fine, if you can move on to the next slide, please. So I'll try and not repeat. Sorry, first I'll introduce myself. I'm Dave Sheridan, Exec Chair of Ilka Homes. Prior to that, I was Chief Exec of Keepmoor. So I've been in and around development most of my working career, which spans 4 decades now, unfortunately. So from a housing perspective, the reason we created Ilka was to bring additionality to the housing market. As we were expanding Keepmoor, we were finding the ability to recruit trades in various parts of the country very challenging. Quality was starting to suffer from the way things were produced. In terms of the UK industry and the UK construction industry, how we built a home today traditionally is very the same as when I started in the industry in 1979. And clearly the carbon agenda and the green agenda was coming at us with a big wave. So we chose as Ilka to approach this from a scale perspective. And what we saw is to make it economically viable, and people who are using modular at the moment and we're a Cat 1 modular provider will find it slightly more expensive than traditional, and that will remain the case until we get to the scale and the volume and get the supply chain that can enable us to be more competitive than traditional. And we're definitely much on the S curve down towards being more competitive. So we've delivered over 750 homes across 49 sites. We've got a pipeline of 3,500 homes. So we're building up that capacity, we're building up that scale, and we're learning through the capacity and the scale how to produce a better product. And we're currently at the version 2 of the product, and I'll come to that when we come into what we're building. But clearly, what we had to address was the skill shortage. We had to address the need for more homes and all the issues that the previous speakers have talked about. We had to create a business that could address what was the challenge facing the industry. So the next slide, please. So to make it work, we had to look at the right people, and there was no point just creating a factory and taking people from building sites and putting them into the factory. So the people we were looking for were production type operatives. So 90% of the people we employ don't come from a construction background. They come from manufacturing, they come from retail, they come from other sectors such as care. We then had to build a product, and I think some of the questions from this morning's sessions were around, it's no point just building boxes that people don't want to live in. We're building homes. We have to build something that's aesthetic. We have to build something that can be, user friendly. We have to build something that people want to live in, things that, they've got a street scene. Big challenge in all is we have to please the planners. So whilst we can produce materials and products off site, what we can't do is go against planning. So we have to build something that looks like, feels like a home. We have to build something that fits with the local vernacular. We have to build something, that's got that local and touch and feel. And for all, there's a lot of product out there, people still want to see a brick built home. And that's been a real challenge for us, building something that's built in a factory through production, but it has that artisan feel. The other challenge that you've got to get the investment, and we've invested over 500 million in our business so far as a pipeline. So if you're going to get the banks and, taking the case with Sunderland to invest and show how you're going to build a business and to build that, you need that pipeline of opportunity. Our first 400 homes came from 49 sites. That was an average of 12 units per site, which was sub-economic. We had the same challenges as traditional build in the ground. So therefore, we were putting massive overhead onto doing pipeline and doing pilot products. It really didn't work from a production perspective. So we've gone the other way now. Our next 400 units came from 10 sites. So we were increasing the size of the site we were building upon. It enabled us to get the economies of scale from the site-based works. It enabled us to fill the factory with standard product. So we were able to get that pipeline to bring in the investment to create the efficiencies to become more economical viable. The last thing is production, and part of the challenges around production is the supply chain in the UK for home building is geared around a transit van. It's geared around mass 4,000 sites spread across the country. So plasterboard is 84 because it fits in the back of a van. That's great for working on site. It's not so great for working in a factory because you've got to handle it, you've got to manage it, you've got to tape it, you've got to joint it. Similarly, around windows are designed around, a number of sites, not just in time production, filling a factory. We're building 50 homes a week. So we need a different supply chain and a different production line. And these are all challenges we've had to go through over the last 3 years as we've built the business up. So I'm going to show a small video now of our factory and how it works and try and illustrate some of the differences between site production and what happens in the factory. So if you can roll the video, please. What the video would have shown is it's a task-based operation with machines being introduced to do some of the tasks that what would have been done on site. So what we've got now is screw bridges, we've got CNC machines, and we move stuff around the factory like you would in a car plant. And it's interesting to hear Sunderland talk about learning from car manufacturing. All our head operations team within the factory come from a car manufacturing based mentality, which is where the modules move along the line to the operatives rather than the operatives moving to the modules, which you would do on site. We've also tried to take away from traditional supply chain and bring in kit that's sub-assembled, so we can become an assembly factory rather than a manufacturing factory, which is double handling and increasing overhead and increasing cost. So what I'm showing on this slide is to try and create that street scene, that's curb appeal, that volume that gives you, modular doesn't have to be ugly. This is a site that we're going to be delivering in Exeter. It's at Exeter Junction. It's literally 200 yards from the train station for people who know it. It's going to be a 200+ unit site. And what we're trying to do there is create, modern feel. This product is miles away from the first product we built 3 years ago in Hull. This is taking the learning that we've learned from that site, applying different principles, and taking what Gaynor said in the last presentation. We use the platform sort of basis. So the homes with the pitched roof and the homes with the flat roof are the same homes, some being 3-story, some being 2-story. So what we're trying to do is create, if you think about an Audi and a Skoda and a Volkswagen all being off the same platform, but they're very different products from very different price points. That's exactly what we're trying to achieve through the use of manufacturing offsite and doing it through a 3D basis. And if you move on to the next slide. So what we're creating is a home. And if you were to take a sort of layout printout of a Taylor Wimpey home, a Barrett home, or of any of the traditional house builders, we're trying to create something that's very similar from our core product. So you've got the front door, back door, you've got the same number of windows, you've got the toilet under the stairs. But what we've also done is took feedback from the customers about what worked in product one, what didn't work in product, again, the product. So we used to have toilets coming off open living spaces. We've changed that now. What we're also doing is this product actually meets the standard for 2025 already. So we've designed in all that future proof and that future learning. This product can be used for either net zero, so a zero carbon in performance home, or can have a traditional gas boiler. We originally designed the product without gas boilers because we knew where the regs were going. Unfortunately, the customers still want a gas boiler, so we've had to reintroduce that into the product basis. So we're trying to design in for the future. We're trying to future-proof the product from a build perspective. We're trying to take customer feedback to make sure the home works as a home should work for the occupier, but we're also trying to design in efficiency of build. And we're trying to bring together the culture of manufacturing and the culture of development. And that hasn't been easy over the last 3 years. I used to have dark hair when I started this journey, and it's not been without its challenges. So from a manufacturing perspective, from a manufacturer's perspective,
you know, taking a lot of the points that Sunderland and sort of the Offsite Alliance have made, it's around having that client engagement in an early stage to understand what they're getting. Is to use the architect where the architect can be efficient, so we can create the street scene, but use the standard product to make sure that the street scene delivers what the customer wants. It's creating great homes to live in. It's not about creating a product. We are creating a home. And we're trying to do something from a manufacturer perspective with an artisan client, and trying to get them to meet is not without its challenges to get them efficiencies. This hasn't been without its challenges in terms of we need to get mortgageability, we need to get the accreditations. Every one of our products comes with the NHBC guarantee, so you get 10 years warranty. There's 2 years product guarantee. The BOPAS guarantee is for 100 years to give the product a 100-year guarantee. So what we had to do is meet or beat the equivalent standard from the traditional house builders to make sure this product can sell into the market. So that's again, I'll just finish off on that point. So thanks for listening.
Thanks, Dave. Right, I'd like to welcome Verity.
Thank you, and a great intro from Dave for what I'm going to be talking to you about, which is really why modular matters. So my name is Verity Davidge. I'm typically running the policy team at Make UK, but also work with Steve Cole, who heads up Make UK Modular. And I think it's important to just set out, you know, what and who Make Modular is, and essentially why we set it up. And I'm sure in the Q&A, if you've got questions about that, Dave will also feed in. But Make UK Modular for us is very much now the voice of the UK's largest and most advanced manufacturers of modular homes. What we're aiming to do is really represent the most advanced form of housing construction in the UK. And you've seen some great examples from what Dave has spoken about of exactly those sort of companies. So Make Modular was initially founded by 5 businesses, including Ilka Homes, and we've since expanded. And for me, given Make UK is about representing manufacturers, seeing Make Modular members and what they do and how they do it is very much what I see in automotive companies, in aerospace companies, in other sectors within manufacturing. And that's the real difference that I think modular construction plays. It's very much pioneering this next generation of buildings. We enable the building of new houses and apartments at scales. As Dave said, really inspiring design, employing cutting edge technology for construction and living, while creating some of the most sustainable buildings on earth. So by building factories in areas of low economic activity, modular members are actually creating thousands of jobs to help the nation level up. I think for us also, a lot of the time the housing market is still slightly running on 19th century technology and practices. And what we see amongst modular members and more widely is actually that real use of not just modern methods of construction, but for me, modern manufacturing technology. So the use of robotics and cobotics. For us, for modular homes, the time is very much now. We know we need more homes and fast, and they need to be green to build. We produce homes with less energy, but also great quality and value. For us, in terms of the housing crisis, the answer is indeed modular. So as I mentioned, when we talk about Make Modular, we talk greener, faster and better. The UK housing is currently in crisis. Traditional home building can simply not deliver what is needed in sufficient quality and scale, but actually new generation modular homes can, and I will come onto a slide later that actually demonstrates those forecasts. Factory engineering means that modular homes can actually be built to consistently high standards, at lower cost and at speed, and delivered to sites with hugely reduced disruption. And again, I'll come onto that a little bit later. Importantly, if we're thinking about the levelling up agenda, we do now have a new Secretary of State for levelling up, so levelling up continues and lives on. We are seeing jobs created in factories which can be located where they're needed, and then houses and apartments delivered to where the homes are needed. So really pushing on that levelling up agenda. Modular homes are also some of the greenest homes being built at scale in the UK, both green to build and green to live in. And for me, this has been a really kind of interesting insight as I learned more and more about modular homes and went to visit factories such as Dave's. They can be built with up to 97% less embodied carbon. They can cost 20% less to heat. Who doesn't want to reduce their heating bill right now? And use 30% less energy, and can be built in just 12 weeks. So really, this is all about being greener, being faster, and being better. And as Dave touched upon, it's very much a new and innovative industry. We've seen huge investment from companies who have put this kind of capacity together. And actually, if we look at that capacity and look at those forecasts, overall, we have the potential to deliver around 20,000 new modular homes per annum between now and 2025. So if we could go on to the next slide. So what is a modular home? Hopefully you've been learning all throughout the day, but essentially a home where the 3D primary structural systems are essentially pre-manufactured. So Dave spoke about this. And if you go and visit a modular housing site, for me, it is very much like visiting a manufacturing site. It essentially means that the homes will be comprised of a number of modules. You could call it Lego housing, but we wouldn't be allowed to. But that is essentially how they are pieced together. And these modules are produced in a controlled factory environment, which means that actually they can take advantage of continual improvements and also just from a health and safety perspective, kind of lessen the risk. Modular housing can be used to build anything from detached family homes to terraces, flats and high-rise. So I think there's often a perception challenge of what a modular home could be, but actually it could be a wide-ranging number of things. So in terms of housing greener, faster, better, here is the world's tallest residential modular building on George Street in Croydon, and this was built by one of modular members, Vision Modular Systems. It was completed in a third of the time of a traditional build. And actually a new study by Cambridge University shows that it actually has 45% less embodied carbon than it would have done should it have been built by a traditional build. It even recently won quite a prestigious Excellence in Innovation Award at this year's Awards of Distinction at the World of Modular Conference in Texas, and it was built from a factory in Bedford. So cutting edge technologies of new buildings aren't just in Tokyo or Berlin or New York, they're actually in Croydon, they're in Shelby, and they're in Corby too. And to the next slide, please. So people often ask us, kind of why modular? Tell us the facts about modular. Here are a few of our personal favourites. So I already mentioned that modular homes are built with up to 97% less embodied carbon, which helps to reach the UK's very ambitious net zero targets. They can cost up to 20% less to heat and use up to 30% less energy, which again is really critical at a time of increasing energy bills for customers and facing a cost of living crisis. They can be built in up to 12 weeks, so we're providing higher quality homes faster, helping to solve that housing crisis. And actually, Make Modular members alone have capacity to deliver around 75,000 modular homes over the next decade, which would create potentially an additional 50,000 new jobs. So for us, we say modular time is now. We need more homes, we need them faster, we need them greener, and we need them better. So since 2016, nearly £1 billion worth of private finance has been invested in R&D and new factories. So huge commitments from the industry and the players within them. More than 2,000 jobs have already been created with the capacity in place for thousands more. We've just seen recently the announcement by Top Hat for a new factory, so creating even more jobs. And while still lower than we'd like, modular factories have substantially more women on the factory floor than a traditional building site. And I will cite some of those figures later. And overall, delivery has actually grown by 478%, so pretty significant. And yet that capacity, we have potential to build even more, as I mentioned, 20,000 new homes per year by 2025. So I don't ever like to take credit for these slides because they're always our clever economists that do the work behind the background. But essentially, we were looking at the potential growth versus maximum growth. So what you can see on this screen here is that between 2016 and 2022, volumetric housing delivery output grew by 478%. As I mentioned, this was backed by nearly £1 billion worth of private investment. However, we're not quite making the most of this delivery capacity in R&D, which has already been put in place. So at the current rate, so your current rate there is your red dotted line, we will be utilising less than 2/3 of our modular capacity. If actually you look at that green dotted line, that is the maximum capacity delivery assumed to be around 15,600 homes based on Make Modular member data. And then maximum capacity delivery for the entire industry could be around 22,500. We're basing that on all volumetric category 1 modular developers that we know of. So we are growing really fast. We are filling a big gap, but there is a huge gap of what we could actually achieve in terms of meeting the housing shortage. If we can go on to the next slide. So I think Dave sort of touched upon this a little bit. You know, this is very much where we are on the innovation curve. Government has successfully stimulated the market. It secured substantial private investment into modular. It now has a once-in-a-generation opportunity to transform the UK housing market. You know, we say we're at the tipping point, we're at the catalyst, we're at the time of opportunity. What we want to do now is really kind of take this forward and meet those potential forecasts that I mentioned on the previous slide. So we work, of course, directly with Make Modular members, Ilka, Lang O'Rourke, Top Hat, Tide, Vision, and others. But we also work with a wider range of clients and partners. Won't go through them all now. But you know, many of our Make Modular members are backed by the likes of TDR Capital, by Goldman Sachs, and then we work closely with others such as Thames Valley Housing, Peabody Group, and a number of other partners, and we'd really like to extend that further. So here's why we think local authorities and modular are in fact a match made in heaven. Well, firstly, modular is all about minimal disruption. Traditional construction can be highly disruptive to local communities. It can clog transport networks, it can create dust and dirt and a huge amount of noise. And large numbers of sizable moving vehicles can often make parents feel a bit uncomfortable for their children. And to be honest, it can last a really, really long time. By moving the vast majority of the trade work off-site and into factories, modular building sites actually minimise disruptives on-site trade work, ensuring there is less impact on local communities. Modular building sites are almost recognisable from traditional build in terms of noise and cleanliness. And as I mentioned, walking into a Make Modular member is like walking into a Make UK member, in that it is very much focused on that kind of clean and efficient production and processes. In terms of carbon footprint, again, a really great and positive story to tell. By building an efficient manufacturing environment, we're able to drive much needed reductions in carbon footprints. We know that the construction industry is responsible for quite a significant proportion of the UK's carbon footprint. That Croydon scheme I showed you earlier was the subject of that new study, showing that actually that was 45% less embodied carbon than the equivalent traditional build. So other modular providers are even going further on net zero, and carbon with savings of up to 90% considered achievable. Also, energy performance. You know, UK homes are a bit like US cars. They're designed to run on cheap fuel, but as we all know, the price of energy is rising rapidly. We can't escape it. More and more people are faced by the choice of whether to heat or eat. Modular homes are amongst the most energy efficient on the market, hence why they're so common in colder countries such as Sweden. You know, modular homes are already consistently building the EPC-A homes. The traditional builders are actually struggling to deliver, and providers like Ilka are currently delivering the country's first zero bills home in partnership with Octopus Energy. There's always also a point around quality, and I think sometimes this is a bit of a perception issue when it comes to modular. But unlike traditional builds, manufacturing uses a continual improvement process to learn from mistakes and continually improve and refine products. And that's exactly what we see in modular housing. Higher build speed is fantastic for first phase regeneration, meaning far less need for highly unpopular resident accounts, where you move them out of their current home to a temporary home, demolish the existing home and build a new one. So actually it overcomes a lot of those challenges. Speed of build, again, for me, a real key takeaway that modular housing is typically built at 3 times the speed of a traditional. So for affordable rent, this is huge. People are off the waiting list faster. The council secures rental income earlier. So win-wins all round. And in terms of the workforce, I mentioned this earlier. So around 1 in 100 site workers in the country are currently female, whereas 1 in 8 factory workers are. Yes, we've still got some way to go, but actually a vast improvement. The construction workforce itself is under huge pressure, with hundreds of thousands of people leaving the industry, and lots of data now telling us they don't plan to come back. Modular is bringing in a different demographic of workers. Again, Dave mentioned this earlier, into the sector, so bringing people in from other sectors and training them and upskilling them to deliver on modular construction. In terms of funding, the Affordable Homes Programme has already ring-fenced 25% of its budget for MMC development, meaning there is quite a sizable backing from Homes England for MMC and modular. Of course, we would like it to be higher, and we would like a little bit more ring-fence for volumetric, but actually that's a potential great opportunity for us to work together. And finally, affordable housing. So with higher energy performance, lower resident bills and higher build speed, modular works extremely effective as an affordable housing product. If we can go on to the next slide. So here's just some examples that you might have seen recently in the news, just showcasing the kind of real brilliance of Make Modular members and modular construction. So recently, Top Hat announced to build another factory in the UK, which will be Europe's largest. You see Vision winning awards for innovation and excellence, and really this new story about how we can transform the housing market and construction to bring it really into line with what we're seeing in manufacturing, adopting modern and advanced manufacturing techniques to take advantage of all of the kind of case that I made on the previous slide. Can go on to the next slide. So concluding points for us, modular's housing time is now. We have the ability to create real change. We have the ability to create greener and better homes and faster. We have a great story to tell. We can help level up. We can help achieve net zero. What we are keen to do now is to work in partnership with developers, local authorities, housing associations, and indeed national government to ensure that modular housing can continue to transform the state of housing in this country. And who knows, we might actually meet those forecasts. And I think that's it from me.
Thank you very much, Verity. That's great to have you at the end to give us a roundup of what we've heard today and some further thinking for the future. Brilliant. So could I ask all of the speakers to come on camera and to join us for a Q&A? So we've got a lot of questions that have been answered in the chat. It's been a really good day, but I know that a lot of questions have been answered already, but quite a few I think we could spend a little bit more time thinking about. So the first one I would like to ask, this is for Neil. Costs have been talked about in the chat throughout the day, and this question came in at the beginning of this afternoon's session, and it asks, what is the cost comparison between the MMC and the traditional build? If you could start us off with that, that'd be great. So
I'm probably going to avoid answering the question directly around the cost because that's not my area of expertise. But I think what we have to be careful to do is, as Verity alluded to in her presentation, there's a lot of benefits and potential savings through the use of MMC, and I think if we look purely at capital cost, yes, there are challenges, and particularly in the north where we're based, but there are huge social and economic benefits that can be driven through the use of MMC. And I think we really have to take that value side into the analysis when we're trying to determine feasibility and viability of projects. I think that's one thing that hopefully, we as an authority are trying to change mindset, look a little bit different, look at the whole life position, look at the added value that it delivers. Over time, the cost will inevitably come down. I think at the moment there's a careful balance to be made between, specification and expectations. I think the industry's driving to get more consistency. We've had experiences where a developer, a housing association, whoever, they've got a specification they've had for 10, 15 years. Their asset management's all built around that, and there's a reluctance to change. So there really needs to be that coordination piece around, design, specification, and asset management that will help to drive the value down. So there's a premium in product component and everything like that we need to address, but we can't lose sight of the long-term value.
Thank you, Neil. Would anyone else like to come in there?
I would just reinforce again that point around, the potential for, lowering costs overall. At the moment, everyone, Dave might be able to talk about the cost of one modular home versus a traditional build. But if we think about like outputs and the kind of the end product and that reduction of cost for that person living there, I think that's such just a powerful message and story that almost it's still going a little bit unheard, that actually it can reduce bills, it can be more energy efficient. So even if the cost up front may look higher, actually like the cost in the long term is what we should be focusing on a lot more.
Yeah, just to take a case study that we did, we delivered a scheme twice as quick as trad build on 100 units. So the savings on prelims were fantastic. The savings on disruption to the surrounding environment were huge. Depending on where it is in the country, depending on land value and the cost of trades. So taking Neil's point, in London, we can be very competitive. In the Northeast, we're less competitive. In fact, we're probably more expensive, to be truthful. But the cost of the home over time will be the same cost whether it's delivered to London or delivered to Sunderland. So overall, economically, on a portfolio, we'll be more cost competitive in a very short order of time. But you need the volume up front to get the economies of scale to create the investment. So if you think of a video recorder that was just produced was about 500 quid, they finished up with 100 quid. The same economic curve will happen with the production of homes in a factory.
I think it is. I think with materials inflation costs at the moment as well, I think those developers that are developing possibly bigger schemes out there actually don't know their costs from the outset because they're getting charged for delays, they're getting charged for variation and changes. So actually, we've done a lot of work with some big developers recently and looking at that, they say actually it's cost comparative from the outset, but what are they saving throughout the life cycle of that project, and then furthermore to the tenants that's passed on. So I agree with everybody here that it's, it's not about comparing apples for apples, is it? It's about comparing something that you're getting better quality, you're reducing your carbon, it's got all those wonderful benefits, but we're not comparing the two. There's pointless in comparing the two. We need to look at it holistically on the value that it's going to give to that community and to that local authority and to that owner at the end of the day.
Thank you all. So you all seem to answer that in the round and looking at the wider value, which was great to hear. But Gaynor, if I could come back to you and then we could see if anyone else would like to come in on this. There was a question in particular looking at subcontracting and the increased expense of using traditional main contractor and then subcontracting an MMC specialist. So it'd be good to get some of your thoughts on that, if that really is an increased cost, and then how to deal with that sort of challenge.
I it's not, it shouldn't be an increased cost, because actually you're managing far less packages. So really, what if you've got your design team, you've got your manufacturer, you've got your groundworks teams, and then finishing and install. So there's your 4 packages, whereas main contractor would be managing lots of different subcontractors all over the place. So when we break it down like that, you're managing much less. And if you go to somewhere like Dave, at Ilke, Top Hat, any of the big ones, they're doing all that themselves. So you're handing everything over. The design's done. You just have to worry about placemaking. So really, it should be more cost effective to do it that way. There are specialist contract managers as well out there, like Black and people like that are specialist offsite that are managing. It's more contract management than actually your sort of traditional main contracting route that you need to go down.
Great, thank you. Would anyone else like to comment on that?
Yeah, if I can just say a couple of words, it's been a just journey of discovery for us, because we started off with, there's still certain packages that you got to do through a subcontract model, but we've actually changed to a direct employment model now, because what we're doing is it's a different type of contracting, and it's people are approaching with a very traditional mindset, which is you place an order, somebody does a package of works, and then, but it's not like that. It's more of a manufacturing sort of type approach to things, and so we want people to understand the product. We want people to understand what the quality is at the end. So everybody who now works in an Ilke home is employed by Ilke on the internal, because that's what we want for that quality, so we can retain the quality and the productivity. And because we're doing 90% offsite, the 10% offsite, the parcels aren't attractive to the subcontractor. So we leave the subcontractors deal with traditional builders. We'll deal with a different approach, which is taking cost out of the process, because we're not putting profit on profit. We're just delivering direct to the customer.
Great, thank you. Since we're with you, Dave, there was a related question, and it's quite specific here. Who would act as principal contractor under CDM and coordinate the substructure works on site prior to installation?
It depends on what the package is let. So taking sort of the point I made about pilots, where we're working for pilots, where we're working through a main contractor, they acted as principal contractor under CDM. In the last 10 schemes that we've done, we've been the principal contractor. So we've acted as the CDM coordinator and the principal contractor under the CDM regs. And we control the ground worker, or we engage the ground worker under traditional methodologies. And there's 3 routes to market. We have supply product only to a main contractor, such as a Vistry or an NG. We act as facilitators, so somebody like Places for People own the land and they've got a construction management team and they act as principal contractor, or we act as the principal contractor to do a turnkey project. But the groundworks are no different to traditional. It's there's nothing rocket science what we're doing when we get to site. We're just delivering homes through a different methodology.
Great, thank you. Right, so the next question I have here asks, I was wondering if the lifespan of a modular unit has any differences to that of a traditional built unit. Does anyone like to jump on that question?
Well, I can speak from a manufacturer's perspective that all the warranties we've got is exactly the same as construction. The BOR Pass accreditation we've got is for 100 years. We've got the same lifetime guarantee on the bricks as a traditional builder would have. We've got the same lifetime guarantee on the boilers as a traditional builder would have. Clearly, we can't say one of our homes has stood for 200 years, the same as trad build, but we would hope in 200 years' time you could still come along and see an Ilke home in the field the same as you would any other home. So it'll tell over the lifetime. But even if you look at some of the prefabs, post-war prefabs, they're still standing tall and proud. They've had some maintenance on them. And what we're building today through our methodology is far superior to how them prefabs were built in 1945. So I would say, I've knocked down as many traditional homes over the life of my regeneration career. I've knocked a fair few street clearances down in Sheffield, Manchester. So it's about the placemaking, it's about the environment as much as the product. So I'm pretty confident that they're as good as, if not better than, trad build.
Yeah, I think, most of the ones in my previous role at Modularised, designing them, you are designing for that 60-year, 75-year, 100-year lifespan. And for me, offsite isn't new. If you walk around Amsterdam, they're all timber buildings that are still standing. Now, is that offsite? Of course it is. The Royal Insurance Building in Liverpool was built mainly out of steel. That was built in the 1800s. It's still standing. It's not new, and they are going to last. If anything, they are designed to last. A lot of thought has gone into these. We say the new kind of offsite that we see now. There's more design in these than there would be on your traditional sites that are just thrown together.
I think there's a bigger picture piece to play as well. We look at the way people's lifestyles have changed over the last few years and what their expectations are of the house. I think, the product will perform how the product performs, but equally, a lot of focus needs to be on the design and the flexibility and how, the role of the house can change to meet changing demands. I think there's also a piece around how the home sits in the community, and sort of picking up on what Dave said, the house will often survive the environment. So, it's important when you're embedding this new technology into the community that you've got the right asset management, the right infrastructure that sits around it to support, the newfound technology and the advancement that's there. Because if it's not part of a wider plan, then, there's a risk that, the negativity goes towards the product when actually it's the environment it sits within.
Brilliant, thank you. A question was asked this morning, which I think is related, and it says something along the lines of, what if people wanted to do their own home improvements? How easy is it to do that with an MMC home? Don't know if anyone would like to come in with a thought.
It shouldn't be any different. We're not using space age materials here. We're using steel and timber and plasterboard and traditional construction materials. All we're doing is assembling them in a more efficient process. Everything is designed to the nth degree in 3D. There's a big push from us on the digitalisation side now to work out how do you get that information in a product data management system from start to finish. And I'm sure Dave does this. I'm pretty sure they have a product data management system and ERP systems and all of that. And when it comes to handover, the customer gets all that information in a digital environment that can be kept and stored. And that's the important thing, I think, for me, is that digitalisation. Dave, you've got
we have a property file that goes accompanies the house as it gets handed over, and we share that with the asset managers of the clients that we pass the product to. But it's no different to a timber frame home that's built in 25% of the homes across the UK. All you need is a structural engineer to do your designs, make sure they're signed off correctly, and they're as adaptable as a trad home. There's some restrictions around the frame, but that's the same with timber frame. It's the same with any openings. You've just got to provide the right engineering support before you do the alteration to your home. But the inside of the homes, they're probably, because all the strength is in the frame on the outside, the mountable partitions, you can probably do more internal alterations with less disruption than a traditional build anyway.
And I think it's back to that perception point. So when I went to see Ilka, when I went to see LNG and Langerock, and you see it there, like in a factory being built, and I just think of when I bought my first new build, name the house builder, but in terms of like what you can pick and the design, there is, it's not even that they're similar. There are more even opportunities now in modular, and I think that because people have this perception that it is modular and it is bits being put together in a factory, that it's restricted, and it's absolutely not. To kind of Gaynor and Dave's points, you can do just as much as you would with a traditional build, and even now you could probably go see it being built, and I think that's the real opportunity, that it is all about kind of quality and design. It's not about doing things kind of, I think sometimes speed can be associated with kind of looking like cheap, but actually it's the complete opposite. It's using cutting edge technologies. It's using kind of digital logbooks, I would call them, when you hand it over to the customer, and actually building the future homes, which should be a far more attractive offer.
Thank you. Be good to hear from Neil first of all, and see if anyone else has anything to add regarding the role of local government in taking on MMC. And there's a question that's just come in the chat which is related to that, which here we go. Talks about the costs. So it says, if the costs are greater upfront, how have you sold that to politicians or decision makers, where ordinarily procurement and strategic decisions are driven by the bottom line? So I guess the potential cost implications, which I think you have to some degree put to bed, but also perceived new ways of working, and how have you solved that within local government?
So I think, certainly in our city, we've got to take a long-term view on investment and cost. We have a huge issue with depopulation that we need to address. We need to build homes, we need to build them quicker, and we need to provide an alternative offer that brings back to our city centre. If we just keep doing what we're doing and focusing on the old methodology and decision making process, then the private sector won't deliver. We've got brownfield development sites that are high risk, whether it's traditional construction or MMC, the viability doesn't stack up. So we have to take a longer term view. We have to look at the wider picture that we've already talked about around the value side of things, that what it brings to the city, what it brings to the residents, and be prepared to take a view that we can make places, we can drive market growth, and over time the economic benefits will significantly outweigh the initial capital cost metrics. So in terms of engaging politicians and changing mindsets, it's down to local authorities to drive a different approach, drive a more aggressive view. The traditional housing industry is a big articulated vehicle, and it doesn't turn quickly. Change won't happen quickly, but we've probably got the biggest ability to make that change because we can drive volume. And through some of the examples we put across in our presentation, and come back to what the point that Dave made around the number of orders he had to take to deliver his first ever however many units. We can do it at scale, so we've got to be the pioneers and take people on the journey, and we need to step outside our comfort zone.
I think to your wider kind of question, Victoria, about the role of local government is also, supporting planning permissions, engaging early, fixing the problems as early as possible. We know that the planning system doesn't particularly put modular at advantage. So the role of local authorities, local government, actually really supporting planning permissions is a useful first step. I think nationally, what could we want to do around planning more widely, and the role of both local and national government? For us, it's very much fast tracking a route for net zero homes, which would actually fast track a lot of modular homes and prioritise net zero homes for schemes for planning permission. I think that is what we would like to see happen. But for local government, it is those approvals, supporting planning proposals and permissions, and like I say, engaging early to fix any problems that we might perceive, so we don't see any slowdown to what could be a really speedy and effective process.
And as an experienced developer who's been around the industry a long time, I think we've got to look at this as an investment rather than a cost. And I think it's very short-sighted for people to look at just the capex up front. If you think of the motor industry now, where it's come from, or even the boiler industry, when we used to all have back boilers and we moved to wall boilers, and now we're moving to heat pumps. If we carry on as we are, there won't be the people to build the homes, because there's not the entrance into the building industry, and there's 4 to 1, I think, the ratio again, and you might correct me on this, leaving the industry rather than entering. So unless we find another way of delivering homes, it's going to be more costly, because we're going to have to start from a very low base unless we invest now. And if you think of electric vehicles 10 years ago to where electrical vehicles are now, it took pioneers and brave people to invest. And a lot of government grant went into electric vehicles because they saw the challenge of carbon neutrality coming along. And we need that level of investment to come into the home side as well, because it will become, a self, going back to Mark Farmer's modernise or die. you know, some of them chickens are coming home to roost now. So we do need to invest now to create the homes for the future.
Thank you. That's great. One last question, I think. Gaynor, in your final slide, you talked about some tips, and one of them was, you said, people shouldn't be afraid. Do not be afraid to ask. It would be good to know, what do you think most people who are new to this topic are most afraid of, and how can we, or the sector and people like yourselves, support those individuals on their journey to understanding more and then potentially delivering MMC?
So I think the biggest barrier to change is that not asking questions, is that just carrying on as things have always been done. In 6,000 years, nobody thought it's taking me ages to stack these bricks, which should just beggars belief. And while you're watching all the other industries thrive and grow and evolve, and the construction sector hasn't, it's got broken procurement, broken planning system, it's got all of these problems that need to be fixed. And we need to challenge that. As a sector, we need to not sit back and keep dealing with the same problems over and over. We need to stand up and go, hang on, why are we doing this? Is there a better way to do this? Do I need help to do this? If so, where do I go to get help? And there are all those questions. And I guess I don't know why there is those questions, but it does need a huge behavioural and cultural shift in order to evolve any sector. But I think the construction sector has just been so terribly slow. And there's a huge amount of resources out there, huge, all free. You know, the Supply Chain Sustainability School is a fantastic, fantastic resource. They have webinar after webinar, learning pathways that you can use. We're about to have our own Offsite Alliance and Supply Chain Sustainability School learning pathway. So there's really no excuse, I don't think, for not asking questions. That's how we all learn. Why would you ever stop learning?
Brilliant, thank you. Well, on that, I'm conscious that we've been here since this morning and everyone's learned an awful lot, but I think what we should do is thank all of our speakers from this morning and from this afternoon. There are a few takeaways for me. Firstly, Neil, I would like to be invited to the biggest crane lift in history, and maybe other people in the audience will also want to. I'll remember cutting edge design is now in Berlin, Tokyo, Croydon and Corby. I feel like I need to get that into a conversation this week. And also take away, you know, the role of the schemes that people have talked about throughout the day in creating places people really want to live and being inclusive with community engagement. And particularly I found interesting that take home of an increased female feminized workforce. I thought that was fascinating. So thank you to everybody. This is the Local Government Capacity Centre email address. If a question that you put in the chat hasn't been answered, please email it to us and we'll see if we can get somebody in Homes England to answer it for you. Thank you so much to our Homes England staff who are manning the chat, doing an amazing job at getting those responses. Thank you for the really interesting speakers, and thanks to all of you for sticking with us all day on a very hot day. Thank you very much. Goodbye.